since I don't want to miss any gems on the VOD, and I got the feeling that you're going to be full of zingers, knowing you, I want to just kick this thing off officially, and then we'll just kind of go from there. And the way that we'll do that is you just introduce yourself, and you've probably seen one or two of the VODs. Like, let's just kind of start at the beginning, pre SOE, even like how you got there and all that stuff. We'll go.
Yeah. So I'm Steve Danuser, and I currently work on World of Warcraft as the lead narrative designer there. And yeah, so kind of how I got into the industry. So I would say that the earliest traces of what led me here probably go back to my first computer, which is a beloved Atari 800. And I played a lot of, I loved arcade games, so I played a lot of arcade games. And I had a bunch of friends who also had Atari computers, and we were terrible software pirates, and we would just copy each other's games and stuff like that. And from one of those guys, I got a copy of a game called Ultima 3. And I played that, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't know games could do this. I didn't know games could have these cool adventure stories, because everything was about blowing up asteroids or shooting alien invaders or something. And then all of a sudden here was this this game that was like a book to me at the time. And I thought, man, this is incredible. I can't believe this. And that was where I first created a character called Morgard, because you could only have 8 characters in the name. And so I had to drop the U. And that's why Morgard doesn't have a U. But so I played Ultima 3, and then Ultima 4 was like even more insanely great. And so I became a devoted fan of the Ultima series, and moved on to other computers. But I always kept, whenever a new Ultima game would come out, I would be crazy for it. And I was also big into, like, you know, at the time you would connect to bulletin boards and stuff like that. And that was the first online experience. And so I got to know people kind of around the country just from connecting to their BBSs and stuff. And it was crazy running up phone bills and all the insane crap that you had to deal with at the time. But eventually they came out with Ultima Online. And then it was just like, oh my God, I can't even believe it. I can't believe that this is possible. And suddenly my friends could not, like, it wasn't just that my friends were playing their version of Ultima, and then we would meet and talk about it. It's like we could go to dungeons together. We could do all this stuff and get ganked by red named players out in the field. And, you know, all these stories started happening of like the time that you beat somebody and took all their crap, and the castle that you built and all this stuff. And it was just utterly amazing. And so we had a guild going for that. And then some of the guys in the guild started talking about this other game that was in beta, and they were saying some cool things about it. And then the game got released, and they're like, man, I really want to check this other game out. It's called EverQuest. And I was like, why would you leave Ultima Online? That's stupid. It's perfect. Why would we leave Ultima Online? I can't even, believe you. And they're like, no, man, it's cool. I bought the game. You got to at least check it out. And I'm like, wait, I got to buy another graphics card to play this game. I got to upgrade my modem because probably the 1200 baud isn't gonna do it for me. So they kind of reluctantly dragged me into it, and but I bought the game, installed the game, probably not that long after it was released, and kicking and screaming, I log into the game like, I'm gonna hate this. This is stupid. Why would I do it? And just seeing the world in 3D, I was like, again, one of those brain explosion moments.
Was it like near instant? Like, yeah, no, exactly.
It was like, again, one of those, like, I can't believe this is possible kinds of things, It was that stunning. And just to be able to move through a world in 3D and see those other people in 3D, and everything felt so interactable and so just this tapestry that was just waiting to be discovered. And anybody else who wasn't already, of my friends who wasn't already playing it, I just was like, you got to get it. We got to go. And that was the beginning of a great love story with EverQuest.
And I guess, I mean, at that point, it's also the beginning of a different career, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
which it's funny for how there's so many of us and that basically had that. It was like your mind's blown. And as you were describing, I just got goosebumps. I don't even know why. Like when you're describing your experience, I still got goosebumps.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then you play it, your mind's blown. And how do you end up in San Diego?
So I'm from Minnesota. I was living in Minnesota. I'd gone to college for English. I have an English degree. And I always thought I would do something with writing, but I also loved music, and I was working in record stores for a long time. And I loved working in record stores. It was awesome. And but I always had my, computer games was probably my biggest hobby, and EverQuest basically ate all the air in that space. Like I was just playing
For sure.
EverQuest all the time. And
Yeah.
my two of my really close friends were as well, and they were programmers. And this was a time when people had websites, but there weren't really blogs or anything like that, like to a large extent. And my friends were like, if we made some software that would allow people to create blogs, this is before WordPress existed.
Mm-hmm.
We could probably sell that and make some money off of it. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know how to code, but that sounds like an awesome idea. And so they were working on that, and they had a prototype of it, and they said, well, we want to put something up and test it. What should we do? Would you want to write something for us? And I was like, well, yeah, but like, what would we do? And should we do like some kind of, like, I don't want to write a news site, like that's just weird. Like, and they're like, well, we play EverQuest. What if we did an EverQuest website? And we thought, well, okay, that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. And there was already like Alakazam was there and had items, and there was another one that we liked a lot that would have little news headlines and things like that, but they didn't go in depth. And we thought, okay, well, I'll start writing kind of opinion articles, like that'll mix news with opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll do that. And we came up with the name Mob Hunter, and
Fire.
so we started that site, um, and I loved writing articles for that, and so basically started like every day writing articles for Mob Hunter, and just tracking all the developers of EverQuest and what they were doing, anything they would post, to write about. When a patch would come out, I would write about what that was, and sort of built up a following, and eventually over time, one day I got a letter from or an email, I should say. I get an email and I look at it and it says from Scott Hartzman, and I'm like, well, that's dumb. Of course, it's not from Scott Hartzman, who's punking me. But no, it's from Scott Hartzman, and he's like, hey, I read this one of your articles. I think you're missing some perspective on this, and he like told me some, I don't even remember what it's about. It's probably about some class balance thing or whatever. And he's like, well, this is how we actually do that. And he like told me all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, holy crap. One of the developers, is talking to me. And number two, he's taking time out of his day to explain how dumb I was about the assumptions I was making about whatever nerf I didn't like, or whatever it was. And
In
he's
the
like
most
talking to me.
polite manner ever,
Yeah,
the friendliest
yeah.
way of it.
And like, yes, like he's telling me I'm completely wrong. And I'm like, yes, tell me more, because he's so nice about it. Just awesome dude. And that began like a sort of corresponding with him a little bit, and it became, and that's when I kind of started to realize, oh, there were people on the EverQuest team that actually read my site and liked it. And some amount of time passed, and I got an email from somebody, I think probably in PR or something like that, and they said, hey, we're doing our first ever kind of community fan summit thing. We're bringing people out from different fan sites, and we'd like to bring you out to San Diego. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Let's do that. And it was right around the time when, let's see, I'm not sure what expansion it would have been, but it was like the first time they were just about to drop the first screenshot of EverQuest 2. Screenshot. It was some, mocked up dark, you couldn't really tell what it was or whatever, but it was like the first hint that they had that EverQuest 2 was in the works or something. And also at the time, it was either right around when EQOA, EverQuest Online Adventures, for the PS2 was getting released, and so they brought us out. So they had a bunch of things to show us. So we didn't see anything for EverQuest 2 because that was under such lock and key. But they had us play EQOA, and they played. I wish I could remember what expansion it would have been.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out too, timing wise, because of the EQOA and EQ2 part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember the one guild summit that was post Gates of Discord, but that seems like it's too far.
Yeah, that was different. That was past. I was already working there by that point. And this wasn't a guild one. The thing that made it different was it was people from fan sites. So like Alec the Dam was there.
Okay.
So they brought us out. They put us in they had like a gameplay room in building 1, I think, which was where the executives were and stuff like that. Wasn't that building 1? Where PR and stuff was?
I forget how we changed the numbers, because when I got there, the first building I got there, when it was still Variant, it was like when you come into the cul-de-sac and you just go straight. But then they moved everybody to that building at the sort of forefront of the cul-de-sac, and that's where PR and Smed and all those guys were.
Yeah, that was the building where we spent most of our time for this summit thing, was in there. And so I'm there, and I'm just playing stuff, and I'm talking to people and taking notes. I'm getting to meet some of these people. I'd only heard their handles on posts and stuff like that. And it was super awesome. And one of the PR people comes up to me and says, "Hey, Rod Humble would like to talk to you." And I was like, "Rod Humble wants to talk to me?" Like, he's, the dude in charge of the studio at the time. Yeah. And I was like, awesome. So he like pulls me aside and he's like, "Hey, he's asking me what I thought about EQOA, and I'm talking to him and all this stuff." And he's like, do you think you're going to play this game? And I was like, "Well, I would. I don't have a PS2 or anything, so I'll probably just stick with, with playing EverQuest." And he turns to the PR guy in the room and he's like, "I want to get Steve a PS2. I need him a copy of the game. I need him to have the internet connection, like all that stuff." And he just lifts it up, and the PR guy like leaves the room, and awesome. And I was like, "What did I just see?" Like, my mind was completely blown that somebody could just do that, and with a snap of the fingers, make something like that happen. So again, I'm like, oh my God.
It's funny knowing Rod. It kind of probably blew his mind that he could do that as well. It's like, bro, I can do that.
Yeah.
Again, another one of the nicest guys in the world. Can I quick pause, because I'm looking at Streamlabs audio levels, and because we had to do it in this weird way, Steve has sounded perfect on my end so far. Has he broken up for you guys at all? Because the audio meter sticks every once in a while, and I'm like, is it cutting out? Is it just a visual effect? Has he been good? Not at all to you? Perfect, man. Okay, so I'm going to start ignoring this meter and stop freaking out. Beautiful. All right.
Like, that was an awesome experience. That was my first time in San Diego. It felt like, I'll always remember that, I didn't, of course, this is the first time there. I didn't know the highways and stuff, but I can always remember going down this one freeway and looking up at a bridge that was crossing over the freeway, and it was super high, and it had these kind of arches on it. And I looked at that and I thought, this is a Cunark bridge. This is where they got Cunark from, and it was just that kind of like, we're by Balboa Park and stuff. And like the greenery and the lushness of it. And I thought, this is like the jungles of Cunark. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, they're getting inspired by the world around them. And it just, again, it like just kind of blew my mind that I didn't know how games were made. I didn't know anything about it, but like, I at least started thinking about how people must have been inspired by the surroundings and, all that kind of stuff. And it was just one of those really cool kinds of things that stuck with me visually over the years. And to this day, every time I drive by that bridge, I always think about that first time that I saw it. So I went back home, and at the time I was working, I'd stopped working at record stores. I had started being a copy editor. and I worked for different companies for a while, some advertising and stuff like that, and I hated it. And then I went freelance and was kind of just like going from job to job. And I was working on like a catalog for Target or something really stupid like that. And I get an email from SOE, a guy named Andy Seitz, and he's like, "Hey, I work on the EverQuest 2 team. Rod Humble speaks highly of you. We're going to be looking for a community manager, and we would like to know if you'd like to interview for that." And I was like, yes, number one, yes. That sounds amazing. And I went out there and I met the team, and I met Andy, I met John Blakely, who was the executive producer, and they couldn't have been nicer or kinder. And I've never interviewed on a game job before or anything like that. And Blakely was like, ask anybody anything. Just go around, ask them any question you want. They won't always tell you because there's things we have to keep secret. But I want you to feel like you can talk to anybody here and ask them what you need to ask them. And I spent the whole day making the rounds. I was there like from the morning until evening, and went out to dinner with people and stuff. And it was just another one of those like so surreal an experience. And it just felt awesome. And I went home, and a couple days later, they contacted me. They gave me a call and said, "Yep, we want to hire you." And then from there, it was just figuring out timing and all of that stuff. But and it was amazing. So that was what got me. And so that would have been in early 2003 is when I got hired and started. And at that time, the idea was, EverQuest 2 is going to launch this year, so probably in the fall. And so we want to get a community manager a couple months ahead of time before we start doing the heavy stuff. And of course, that wasn't meant to be. And it wasn't until the next year that EverQuest 2 would come out.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember because of the Mob Hunter fame, infamy. Like as soon as you arrived on the scene too, it's like everybody's like, "All right, you gotta go over and talk to Morgard. Got to go over and pick on him a little bit. Welcome to the company."
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's that was one of those periods too where the two teams weren't necessarily talking as much as they could have, but then when and I don't think it was exclusive to this, right? But like when people like you showed up too, that had that link, and it's like, okay, you've been writing about EQ. We've read your writing. We know you know your shit. Blah, blah, blah. It's like then it's cool to have somebody to like talk to a little bit more that wasn't maybe somebody that had been there the whole time or whatever. I don't think I'm articulating it properly, but it was just sort of that yet another link. And we saw that more and more as people left the team and went over there as well. But yeah.
Yeah, it was, again, I didn't know what to expect coming in there. I guess I had a bunch of assumptions about what it must have been like to make these games. And I probably assumed, number one, that everybody knew everything and everybody talked to everybody. And it was like one company making all these games. And once you get inside, you start learning, well, no, by necessity, the teams are not like they're completely cut off from one another, but they're kind of insulated. They have their own meetings, they have their own schedules, they have their own structure in place that people, report in through. And so it was a little surprising to me that the people on EverQuest 2 and EverQuest didn't interact more. I thought like I would come over to talk to you guys sometimes because I wanted perspective about a certain thing or whatever. And I'd be a little surprised sometimes at what, that you didn't know everything that everybody else knew, and stuff. And that was just a learning process for, well, no, that's just how the industry works because everybody needs to focus on the thing that they're making.
Yeah. I've never seen anything even closely resembling a perfect sort of process in that area, especially when you've got games that I think I've seen it be a little bit easier when you're pre-launch and you've got multiple teams working towards launch, because it kind of feels like a lot of times until you get to the end and you're crunching or whatever, that you've got that time to compare notes and blah blah blah. Like when we were on DC, we flew up to Seattle and talked to the guys working on the agency and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you've got a live game, it's just kind of like you're barreling ahead so much that it's kind of hard to take the time to break away. And on the flip side, I've got the feeling that I don't know. I always get the feeling that there's almost like a sense of in order to be able to make your own thing, you've got to keep a certain amount of distance from the existing thing. And so that was a bit of a read too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we were just making the same thing again. When you were on the team,
Right.
did you get that feeling? Did it seem like the team was like purposely sort of like trying to make this thing that did differ from EQ1 or?
Yeah, that was definitely a feeling. My sense was that it came from the top, though, that was a wish at the company level,
Mhm.
because what I picked up on was that nobody knew how long these games were going to last. Like
Right.
people assumed, like, oh, we'll make one expansion for this, and then we got to make another game. And of course, people kept buying EverQuest expansions and wanting more EverQuest expansions. So I think that at first there had been maybe an inkling that EverQuest 2 should have been replacing EverQuest, that they probably have to make an EverQuest 2 and an EverQuest 3 and an EverQuest 4 and all that kind of thing. And when
Mhm.
that proved not to be the case, then maybe there was a bit of a rethink about, well, actually, we want to keep EverQuest going. So let's make something that doesn't directly compete with it as much as possible, make something that feels distinctive. And that way, both products could exist within this ecosystem and keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it was so on the EverQuest 2 team, I would say that there was a division of thought there, because a bunch of the people that they had brought in for EverQuest 2 had loved EverQuest and they wanted to make another one. And then they were being told, well, don't make exactly another one. Make something that's different enough that it feels like its own thing while still feeling like the same franchise. And that's a really tough position to put anybody in. Like, hey, we have a thing we like, make another thing that's like it, but not too much like it. You have to make it different from that. And like, well, what are you going to make? What are the decision points where you're going to say, okay, let's keep this thing, but do a different thing for this other one? And like when you have a game like EverQuest where its success was like almost a mystery to everybody who worked on it, really, like it's this magical thing that worked for all these reasons. And if we pull out any, it's like Jenga, if we pull out the wrong tile, we worry that it could fall apart. Well,
Right.
now you're being asked to make a different Jenga tower with different pieces, but have it look like the first tower, but not exactly like it. Well, what pieces are you going to use?
Yeah,
And
and it's tough from the business standpoint as well, I guess, because we have the benefit of hindsight, but at the time it's kind of like, okay, if you can promise 100% cannibalization of the player base, then go for it. But if
mm-hmm.
not, then can you not cannibalize that player base and bring in a new player base? But can you mitigate the risk of potentially not bringing in a new player base? So don't squander the existing player base. And it's just like, well, holy shit, how are we going to pull this off?
Yeah.
So I could definitely, it makes the challenge makes sense from every side on that one. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious. So, can you describe some of what you saw then from your position? Because your role evolved while you were there, and
Mm-hmm.
then you were seeing it in that sort of crucial MMO time. It seems like so much shit gets done in the last year and a half on these things.
Yeah.
So curious what you saw.
Well, yeah, that was and again, I'll credit John Blakely for, he brought me in as community manager, and he could have said, okay, you just stay over here in your corner and make forum posts, and we'll tell you what you need to post. But he wasn't like that at all. He was like, okay, I'm going to treat you like you're one of the leads on this team. You're going to come to every leads meeting because I want you to hear what's going on with the game so that you can accurately represent it to our players. He was a huge proponent of being, representing what the game team was doing honestly to the players.
Right.
And so he wanted me to know this stuff. And so I got in those meetings, and it was both. Um, I learned so much in that first year, but it was also terrifying because then I came to realize, holy crap, they still aren't sure what this game is going to be. Like even in that kind of mid 2003, there was still so many questions, and I was like, well, how the crap is this going to come together? Like I started looking at all that stuff and being like, man, there's some things we had like an asset browser that you could load up different character models and things like that. And so I'd go through all the races that were planned, and some of them looked really good, and some of them were clearly nowhere near to be finished. And I was like, well, I don't know how this is going to work. Like, how is this even going to like function? And as like when Hartzman was on your stream, he told you about, you guys talked about like when some of the EQ people got shifted over to EverQuest 2, because I think there was that feeling of, okay, we got to finish this thing.
Yeah.
And it really was in that last year that everything came together, and so much of the content that had been made just got set to the side because it wasn't good enough. And so they kind of brought in the A team of people to really to build everything the best that it could be within the time frame, knowing that they were racing against World of Warcraft and all that stuff. But it was really cool to see that last year where it went from being essentially you could run around in the world, but you couldn't play a game, to, oh crap, you can play a game, you can play an EverQuest game in this. And it was really cool to see that. But it was man, we crunched the crap out of that year. But it was pretty amazing.
Can I ask a question? It deviates from sort of the background here, and it's speculative. Based on what you saw there, what you've seen in other MMO processes since then, do you think that it's feasible to do that? It's sort of like last year and a half, just get the shit done, like that seems to always happen. Is it possible to do that without 2 to 5 years of whatever it is that happens before the actual getting shit done? Year and a half? Is it feasible?
Well, again, there's a lot of questions that go into that, obviously. Like, what's the scope of the thing you're building? What are the known quantities? What's the team that you have? All of that kind of thing. Every project needs a certain amount of incubation time where you're figuring out what the game is. You come in with assumptions and with a plan, but you've got to be willing for that plan to kind of start twisting and turning and find what it needs to be. I kind of think about certainly storytelling in games, but just game building in a way is often more like archaeology than it is like construction, because it's a process of kind of brushing the dust away and finding what's below the surface, and it's the game telling you what it needs to be in those things. So you need a certain amount of time for that. What I think can vary, though, is using that time smartly, because if you put the wrong team of people together, or people who have vastly different ideas of what that game should be, then you're going to waste a lot of time running in a lot of different directions that are clearly not productive. Like to at least most, to the seasoned developer, they will say, well, that's clearly a waste of time, but other people might insist on trying something that way.
Right.
And so you can meander for a long time and not in a non-helpful way, I would say. But if you have veteran people who are more, again, while still allowing for things to kind of find their path, but still more like, okay, I've got that end target in sight and I know what we're building towards, I think that uses the time wisely, and it sets you up in a better position so that last year of development isn't, well, we've got to not only build the thing, but we've got to figure it out what it is we're building. Like, you better know what it is you're building by that time.
I think in having those creative leaders that foster sort of that thinking and all of that's great. What I'm noticing, though, is those folks at those top roles, at the end of the day, in my experience at least, it's more beneficial to have trigger pullers up there than big thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they've got to be the delivery people, and they've got to understand the creative process. They've got to be, good at it and really love it and have empathy for the creators that are working with them. But at the end of the day, they have to get shit done people. Um,
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that was something I definitely didn't know in the early days. Like I thought, again, my assumption coming in off the streets with this kind of idealized view of what game development must be like. I thought, well, okay, everybody must love EverQuest here, like blindly love EverQuest the same way that I do. They must all want to build the same thing,
yeah,
and they must all have the same vision for how they're going to get there. And no, like no, no, and no. There
absolutely not.
were there were a lot of people on the EverQuest. I wouldn't say a lot of people. There were a number of people on the EverQuest 2 team that were there because they just wanted a job in the games industry, and like they didn't particularly love the original EverQuest, and they didn't particularly want to make EverQuest 2, but that was the job for them, and so they were doing it. And that doesn't mean they didn't do a good job, but I couldn't go to that person and talk to them about the first Nagafen raid, or
Right.
the any of that stuff. Like it just didn't. That I couldn't have those conversations. But there were plenty of people that on the team that I could go have those conversations with. And so I came to learn, well, you need a mix of those people, and you need higher ups at the executive level who can recognize good ideas and talented people and enable them with what they need to get the job done, and then get out of their way. That's the best thing that you can have
Yeah.
for that executive level. Like you say, people who can pull the trigger and make stuff happen, but they aren't trying to meddle with the nuts and bolts of what needs to happen at that game developer level.
Yeah, yeah. And to push that analogy a little bit further, I think it helps when the trigger pullers know what the target looks like. you know.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. All right, man. I'm glad you answered that. I'm sorry, I got a racetrack right outside my house. Little Talladega, Stockholm. So the time spent on EQ2, dude, you've got like, I don't know how much time you've got here today, but you've got a deep and storied career. So I want to make sure we're able to get through this. How long do you
Mhm.
have?
Oh,
Hour,
I
two
got
hours, three
yeah. I
hours?
can I can do a couple hours.
Cool.
So
Then let's do
yeah,
that.
another hour or
So
so.
yeah, then I won't rush you through EQ2. But
Hmm.
I tell you what, like push forward, and then you'll know when the transition point is. It's your story.
Yeah. So I started out as community manager, and we launched the game, and it was tough. There were a lot of technical problems. There was a couple days where we were afraid that we had lost the database, and that initially it didn't look like there was going to be any backups, and we had these dark conversations about, oh shit, like what are we going to do to make up to people, like we've just lost all their stuff that they've been building up, all their things, or what are we going to do. But luckily they found a backup and got it restored, and so we were down for, I think, a weekend or something like that, and then got everything back. But nobody knew, like on the outside, how close everything was to unraveling there.
Yeah, and even before that, like I remember going over one day like super late. I forget what we were crunching on, and people were there, and we're like, "Oh man, you're still here, and what are you doing?" And it's like we're just waiting on a build. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the build times were like 24 hours
uh,
or some shit.
yeah, it was crazy. There were a lot of technical hurdles to overcome there, and yeah, getting builds up, getting them tested, getting them out was always a struggle on that team. Um, but like we got it out there, and we were really proud. Like that was the first time that I felt like I really understood what it meant to be on a game team, because when EverQuest 2 launched, it felt like, and I don't want to trivialize being in the armed forces or anything like that. I don't mean to do that with this, but like it felt like I had been in the trenches with people. Like I felt like these were comrades in arms, that we'd been through this thing and we would always have some kind of bond as a result of having been through it. Like
Oh yeah.
it was just such an amazing bonding kind of experience.
Well, it's so emotional, right?
Yeah,
It's a creative process. It's physically demanding. You guys put in
yeah,
shitload of hours, live in the office, eat in the office. You don't see your loved ones. Like all the stuff that people that work in the industry know about, or people that don't work in the industry have probably read about.
yeah,
And there's just that creative process that's so weird. It's the euphoria of shipping something and making something real. But on the flip side, it's that weird depression that comes from, at least for me, it's like I shipped, I got to do this again. Like I've got to
mm-hmm,
go right back into making another thing, and
mm-hmm,
I've got to put everything I can into it. Otherwise, I'm half-assing,
mm-hmm.
just doing a job. Well, shit, it's like elation followed by like a weird depression, and then back at it. And yeah, the people that you spend that time with, they're all going through the same shit with you.
Yeah. It it is it is a it is that mix of euphoria and exhaustion and all the things that you just described really well. And I think it's one of the reasons why there's not all that many people who stay in, specifically the MMO kind of business for a really long time, because it does take a toll on you. And it
Mm.
does take you have to develop a mindset where you can know that it's a cycle and that you need to repeat this cycle, and find ways to make it not, you need those recharge points. You need all that stuff to kind of refill the tanks so that you
Yeah.
can do it again and enjoy doing it again. And there's a lot of people who, will do it once or twice and then just not be able to go on. They got to find something else. And it's totally understandable. If you're on the inside and you know how these things work, like you've got to know that uh, it's not the right fit for everybody, and that's okay.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
But all right, so I was like we said, I started out as community manager, but like almost from the beginning, um, our lead designer at the time, Chris Ko, he was like, hey, you can write stuff. I don't have that many people who can actually write stuff well. Can you help us write some lore for this dungeon, or can you help us name these characters? Can you help us do this stuff? You know EverQuest, you know what this should sound like. Can you just do that?
Yeah.
And so I started helping out on the design side like almost right away, and that was fun, and it taught me a lot about that kind of stuff. And at the time, after EverQuest 2 launched and things, SOE started looking at a different structure for its community managers. When I joined, I was part of the EverQuest 2 team, and every team had its own community managers. And they decided, well, we should centralize community, and we should have kind of like, yeah, there's people embedded on the teams, but really community will be its own structure, and we'll get a community director, and we'll make all that, make this thing that way. And Raf Koster was the chief creative officer, and he had a big background in community. So they started doing things where all his community managers would have a weekly meeting with him and kind of talk philosophy. And he started writing up documents and things like that. And that was the point where I'm like, okay, this isn't clearly they're not going to look at community management the same way going forward, where it's someone who's on the team, and they want community managers to be this separate thing, and that wasn't what I wanted it to be.
Right.
And so that's when I started the conversation of, hey, what if I transitioned over into game design full time? And the EQ2 team was like, yeah, we would love that. And so I had enough people in place that I could start doing that and transitioning over, and ultimately became a game designer full time. But I've always loved the community aspect of it, and I think, I still think that it's community is at its best when the community manager is a part of that team and is in on, um, hearing the inner workings so that they are able to convey those truths to the public.
Yeah.
But and so that was another big step for me of learning, and I had been watching from the inside. I'd been observing a lot of how game designers worked, but then I started to actually get into the nuts and bolts of it and start building stuff. And again, that was another opportunity to take a whole bunch of assumptions that I had and learn how completely wrong and ill-informed that I was.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure that's at least for me, that's been an ongoing process. I'm still continuing it. Every new
Absolutely.
thing, I'm like, oh shit, I thought I had this figured out.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. Yeah. So how long did you do that?
So like I said, I probably by the time EverQuest 2 launched in November of 2004, I was at least spending part of my time helping out quest design. And then I think right around when Desert of Flames launched the next year, probably was Desert of Flames 2005, probably was.
Chat would know. They'll know in
Yeah.
like 2 seconds.
Probably that's around then is when I fully committed and was became design, and then worked on Kingdom of Sky and Echoes of Fade, where I spent a lot of I had learned enough by that point that I was laying out a bunch of the zone maps and things like that for Echoes of Fade, and some of the overarching stories and things like that. And so I think it was so it must have been Christmas of 2005. So I would go back to Minnesota for Christmas a lot of the time, and which is just the perfect time to go to Minnesota.
I was
right?
about to say that's got to be bad. Okay, well, there may be some sarcasm because of the weather, but on the flip side, man, living in Europe and being able to especially Germany, go to the Christmas markets and stuff. I don't know if you have anything like that up in Minnesota. I assume you're fairly Euro up there.
Well, it is like I hate it when it's 20 below. Like that's unbearable. But if you get a day that's like 20 degrees and a little, everything's covered in a light blanket of snow, and you can go see like the ice castles that they're building and like stuff like that, it is pretty magical. So I do still love that part of Christmas time. But so I'd gone home for Christmas. I'd flown home, and there was another guy from the EQ2 team, a guy named Eric Tice, and he also had family in Minnesota. And he said, well, I'm going to be driving back. Do you want to drive with me? And I was like, oh, yeah, that'd be fun. I like driving cross country. That's pretty cool. And so we were driving back. And along the way, he's like, so do you, what do you think of your future? Like, do you want to stay at SOE? Like, what do you? And I'm like, well, I love EverQuest 2. I love doing what I'm doing, but, I'd certainly consider other things. He's like, okay. And, just kind of like, we had that conversation, and, I didn't think that much of it. And then some months later in 2006, one day he messages me and he says, hey, we need to go out to lunch and talk about football. And I'm like, okay, that's a very, oddly specific thing to say we need to do. Not that going out to lunch was weird, but like to say we need to go out to lunch and talk about football. Like, okay.
Only football. That's all we're talking about if you're reading this email or message.
Exactly. So we go out to lunch, and he's like, okay, here's the deal. Kurt Schilling, right? And so to back up. So while I was not a baseball fan in my youth, and but on the EverQuest 2 team, I knew that we had a famous baseball player who would come to fan fairs and play the game and do press and stuff like that. And I didn't really remember what his name was or whatever. And I probably met him in passing, at one of the fan fairs or something, and it didn't make a huge impression on me. And like PR always handled those guys anyway. Anytime we had a celebrity, it was like all the PR people were all around them, and they were keeping everybody else at arm's length because
So
God knows
weird.
they didn't want, filthy developers talking to their precious celebrities.
Gross.
Yeah. But I put the pieces together and like, oh, the baseball guy. Yeah. And Eric says, well, he's a huge EverQuest 2 player. He knows your work and thinks highly of you. And I was like, again, like what? Like, how would anybody of import know my work? But and he's like, Eric says, well, he's talking about, he's in the last years of playing. He loves MMOs. He wants to build a team to make his own MMO, and he would like to talk to you about joining that team. And I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'd be willing to talk to him. And Eric's like, cool. Here he is, like on the phone, like hands me a phone. And I'm like,
he's been hanging out the whole time listening in.
And so he hands me the phone, and I'm like, hello, hey, Steve, Kirk Schilling here. Yeah, yeah, love what you're doing. You gotta come work. We're gonna do this thing. We're gonna make a great MMO. It's gonna be awesome. You gotta come to work out. And I was, this guy's talking a mile a minute at me. I'd never really met him before, but he's like super passionate, super enthusiastic, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll think about it. Yeah, awesome. Okay, great. We'll be in touch. It'll be great. I'll get you out here. You got to see the place. You got to see Massachusetts. It's going to be awesome. We're going to build a studio. It'll be fantastic. All right, man. Yeah. And it was like a tornado had just like gone past. And I'm like, what is going on? But like that started me, getting into like I can't remember what chat app we would have been using at the time, but like there started to be, jump in and play EverQuest 2 with Kurt and some other guys, and just talk about ideas and things that we wanted to do, and what kind of game would we make if we could make any game that we wanted. And
I love those conversations.
It's super awesome. Like, when you have that kind of blank slate of being like, okay, if we could do anything that we wanted, what would we do? And we talked about all the things that we loved about the original EverQuest, things we loved about EverQuest 2, or which were different in EverQuest 2, other games, all of that kind of stuff. Like, what were the things we loved? How could we take all those things we loved and make them into something new? And what would that be like? And, it wasn't like I was sure that this was the right thing from the beginning, but the more I hung out with Kurt and the other guys and just the passion and enthusiasm, it was something that, again, because when you come from the outside and you join a game team and you think everybody's going to have that just overwhelming passion, and you realize, no, a lot of these people are just professional software makers and they just want a job at the end of the day. Then to, again, get somebody who is like, man, this guy has a lot of money. He has that enthusiasm of a gamer, and he's willing to listen to people who actually make games. Like that seems like a pretty good opportunity. And at the time at SOE, looking ahead to what my career would be, I thought, well, I could stay here and keep making EverQuest 2 expansions and see what other kinds of games would come down the pipeline. Like by that point, Free Realms was, in the works, and I had talked to Rich Waters. He had transitioned over to that at that time, and he was talking to me about potential positions there and stuff like that. And I'm like, man, but what if I did something different? And it was just a good time in my life that I could make a big move and I could take a risk on something and feel like if it didn't work out, it would be okay. And the people at SOE were super nice. So Smed knew Kurt Schilling, obviously, because they had a bunch of interactions. And so there was, anyway, there was like this big meeting that was going to happen. Kurt was going to come out to SOE and he was going to tell Smed that about his plans to start a studio and all this kind of thing. And we said, okay, Kurt, but don't tell him about any of us, about talking to us about it, because we got to protect our jobs here, because we don't know what's going to happen. And Kurt's like, yeah, no problem. I'm just going to talk to Smed. I'm going to tell him that I'm going to make a studio, see if he wants to invest in it or anything like that. And we'll just keep it business or whatever. so I'm at my desk and I'm working, and everybody's checking their phones because we know that Kurt is meeting with Smed, and we want to know if something interesting is going to happen
Everybody's
out of
checking
it.
your access cards
Yeah,
to see if
yeah.
they've been turned off yet.
All that kind of stuff. And I'm sitting at my desk, and so I was sharing an office with Tracy Seamster, and we're in there, and I hear a ruckus in the hallway, and I'm like, what's going on out there? I hear people moving, going out into the hallway, and then I hear, yeah, this is on, and it's Kurt's voice, and I'm like, oh shit, what's going on? And almost like I go to look out in the hallway, and Kurt and Smed are there, and Kurt is going in, he's doing his big pitch mode and stuff, and he points to me and is like, yeah, and I'm taking Danuser, and I'm taking blah, 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 and all this, and I'm just like, oh my God, everything's falling, like, oh, what's happening or whatever. But Smed was the nicest guy about it and whatever. And he was like, encouraging me to do what I felt was best for me and all this stuff. But it was like a moment of terror, worrying that I was going to get thrown out into the parking lot.
You're like, dude, I have not signed anything yet. What are you talking about?
Exactly. But that was just like how Kurt kind of, approached life. And that was the great parts about him, were that enthusiasm and that just kind of energy that you could tell he genuinely loved what he was talking about. And
well, and the way you describe it, how do you turn that down, right? If you've got an opportunity when someone's passionate about a game, they've got experience. I mean, the dude played while he was on the road playing baseball, right? So he's legit in that regard. Mm-hmm. If they've got cash, they got influence, they got passion, they're providing a blank slate-ish opportunity, and you start to get some other people that you respect that are on board as well. I mean, had that opportunity presented itself to me, I probably wouldn't have turned it down either, man. It makes perfect sense. I've described to them the only time I met him twice. Once was when he just randomly walked into my office and asked who I was, what I did, and how much I made, because he would double it. And I was just like, who the F is this guy? I got shit to do, dude. Go away. You're a baseball dude? I watch football. So, and that was, but had he approached me with the other thing, if Eric had taken me to lunch, bam, I would have experienced all of what you're about to experience.
That was, it's funny how fate works in different ways like that, because it was really a matter of right place, right time. And, the fact that I'd been with Eric on that project, and he had at least liked my work ethic and was able to speak to that to Kurt when he was, talking about people that they wanted to build a team around. So,
well, and he's such a sweet dude. I haven't seen or heard from him forever, but dude, such a sweet guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he really was. So, from there it became, okay, I guess we're doing this, and we started figuring out logistics, and there were a good number of people from SOE, and some people that we either knew them who were at other companies, and started assembling this team of initially about a dozen or so people that quickly became about 20 people, and Kurt brought us out to Massachusetts, and again, just kind of like, it was this whirlwind of he brought us to his house, and to see a World Series winning baseball player's house, and his trophies are out there, like it, even again, like, not as a baseball guy, but like, holy shit, like, this is amazing. It's amazing, number one, that people can live like this and have this beautiful house and this great family and all this stuff, and still be just a gamer nerd at heart. And he didn't care about the trophies and the stuff on the walls or anything. He just wanted to bring us into his room where he had his PC set up and show us his gaming rig. Like, that was what awesome. Kurt was excited about. And so again, like you said, like, when you meet someone with that kind of enthusiasm and they're willing to commit fully to doing this thing, yeah, what a great opportunity it was. And so so then I ended up moving out there at the beginning of November of 2006 was when I moved to Massachusetts. And it was bittersweet leaving SOE behind. I loved so many of those people, loved the stuff that we had built. It wasn't anything about wanting to get away from EQ2. I probably could have stayed on EQ2 for a long, long time and been super happy. But it was just the time in my life to take advantage of an opportunity like this, because like how many times do you get to start a new studio with this crazy baseball player who wants to make exactly the kind of thing that you want to make? And by that point, like he'd roped he'd met R.A. Salvatore, brought Bob into the mix, so I got to meet him as well. And Todd McFarlane was on board to kind of oversee the art style and stuff like that. And it just felt like, holy crap, all these pieces are coming together. I gotta see this. Like, how could I not take a swing at this just to see what happens?
Take a swing. I got it.
Unintentional baseball metaphor. I swear, did not mean that. And so then it was. So we came out to Massachusetts. Kurt had rented these a couple big houses because the idea was he knew people would be coming from other parts of the country, and so he had these two nice houses that we called the frat houses, and so people could stay there until they got settled in to the area and stuff. So like
was there beer?
There was beer.
Awesome.
There was shenanigans to be had for sure. But
Ooh,
what's that?
Do tell.
Yeah. Yeah, there was. I remember one party where there was an ice flume that they were pouring shots down, and you would stand at the end of the ice kind of aqueduct of ice, and then the shot would come into your mouth. I don't know. Maybe it was a Massachusetts thing. I don't know. It was the only time I've ever seen that, but it was pretty amazing.
I saw one of those in Germany, actually. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Wherever shit's cold thing.
Wherever it's cold enough, I recommend doing the shot flume. But so yeah, so it was kind of this rotating cast of people. Like somebody would come in, they'd stay at the house for a while. Then they'd move on to, they'd find a place and move out, and somebody new would come in. And it was just this really cool way of kind of getting to know people and hanging out with people. And it did have that sense of camaraderie again, and like, oh man, it's super exciting. And we would bring in candidates to interview, and Kurt would send us to there were these chain of restaurants out there called the Capitol Grill. And like it was one of those things like, oh, Mr. Schilling's table. Yes, you'll have, so we would go there and we'd have a nice steak and we'd interview some candidate, and, we were supposed to wine and dine them. And so that was part of our job in those early days, was just meeting people and seeing if they were a right fit for what we were building. And it was a process of getting to know one another, and then like building a studio from the ground up, which was super interesting. And just seeing that process was very educational for me. And being part of it, like setting, I was part of the group that was working out like what our policies and procedures would be.
Right.
And Kurt had this uncle of his. It was his wife's uncle. We all called him Uncle Billy. And he was this businessman, older guy. He'd done all kinds of businesses around the world. He was this very successful guy, but just the sweetest man. And he told so many great stories. And he just loved us young people coming in, and he kind of fed off our energy. And he would, every time Kurt would come up with some crazy idea, Billy would say, well, that's great, but let's actually structure it this way because this is smarter, and all this kind of stuff. And it was just a great education of meeting this very diverse cast of people and everyone coming together to assemble this studio. And again, like Bob Salvatore lived about 20 minutes away from the studio where we were in Maynard, Massachusetts. We had we moved into this old mill, this like 1800s or maybe older mill.
Mm-hmm.
And it was brick and pipes. And it was on this little pond, and Uncle Billy would go out fishing there, and we could walk to anywhere in Maynard to have our lunches and stuff like that. And all the restaurants, you were like, oh, it's those 38 Studios guys. And, even just being associated with Kurt gave you a little bit of that celebrity kind of over you. It was very intoxicating and very fun. And it was such a great time in those early days because Bob Salvatore would come in, and I got to work with him every week we would talk about story, and I learned so much about storytelling from him, and character building and world building. And he had taken kind of this whole batch of crazy ideas that all of us had put on the table. Kurt, most of all, he would write these huge, like, lengthy design documents, just like write-ups about the races that he loved and places that he had ideas for and all this kind of stuff. And he would, like, send out these documents all the time. And Bob would take that stuff, and he kind of assembled this framework, kind of whittled the things that were just clearly not going to work. But he made this kind of structure for this world and this kind of story that we could tell. And he had a group of people that had helped him on his books, just kind of like, you know, researchers and some of his family members and close friends who were always like his first kind of beta testers for books that he wrote. And he had those people kind of help vet his ideas. And then we had this big day where Bob gave this presentation to the first batch of us that was there for the studio. And he did this big presentation and talked us through and like what the tenets for this world would be and all this stuff. It was just magical, and it was just awesome. And then my job became, okay, let's figure out how to, you know, where does the game fit into this?
Right.
How do we flesh these things out, this story out, to be a world that you could actually move through? And so then we started assembling a team, and I became in charge of the content for that. And just really, you know, we were still figuring out what engine we were going to use and what tools and tech we were going to have. But what we had was this group of people who could get together and talk about story. And it was just a super magical time to be able to use that. It was just such a luxury. You know, we didn't have that at SOE because it was always like, okay, get on to the next thing. We got to build the next thing.
Yeah.
Now we had this opportunity to just sit and think about ideas and really discuss them. And it was so awesome. And to be able to do it with the people that we had, with Bob and the others, it was just really a time that I still treasure greatly.
I can imagine. Yeah, because you came in after that bit of opportunity to sort of breathe and think was over on EQ2. And then going into that process, it's a hell of a, dude, that's a hell of a pre-production process to step into with those guys. I mean, did it ever really get normal for you to sit there and talk story with Bob? Because it's one of those things where, like, I'm assuming you had a similar nerd path as me. Like, I remember sitting in like stairwell in school and shit between classes or at lunch reading his books, right?
Yeah.
Like, did it get normal? I'm assuming it got a little normal, right?
It got normal only because Bob insisted it became normal. Like right from the beginning. Again, like probably within a week of us moving out there, he was like, okay, you're coming to dinner at my house. And we came there, and it was on a Sunday because football was playing. And to be in the Salvatore family as football games, when the Patriots are on TV, like it was like Bob has two sons, a daughter. They had friends over, and like everybody's arguing about every call, and it's this Italian family, like just like you imagine on TV sitcoms and stuff. And they're all just like, I'm coming from this Midwest, you know, background of everybody repressing their feelings in Lutheran church basements, and here is this Italian family watching football, screaming at the TV, screaming at one another, disagreeing about all this stuff. But it was amazing. And like Diane, his wife, cooked this amazing dinner, and we sat there, and it was fantastic. And from the beginning, he was like, you know, I'd be like, oh, R.A. Salvatore, blah, blah, blah. He's like, I don't know who R.A. Salvatore is. My name is Bob. You call me Bob. We do this. And I'm looking at my shelf here. I might have packed it away.
It's crazy because, yeah, I met him a couple times in like the parking lot outside of Sony. And he was he was such a dude. He was just such the most normal guy ever. It was kind of mind-blowing.
So yes, it was amazing to me that I could be in this place. And so we had this great dinner, we hung out, we talked and whatever. And then he's like, hey, I want to give you something. And so he took me into this room. This is the book that was just coming out at the time. And he opens it up, and he writes, I don't know if you can read this,
I can't read it to us.
but he said, it said, Steve, here's to many years of good work together, R.A. Salvatore. And it was, again, like he hands this to me, and I was like I'm gonna cry. Like it was just one of those things.
It
that was
literally
so surreal.
just started raining. Just started raining in game. Those are the feels just got triggered. Yeah,
it is.
I told him my story, like, man, I started, like, I think it was Crystal Shard, or what was the first in the trilogy? I don't remember. Anyway, I told him about it, and he was like, bring it in. Next time you see me, I'll sign it for you. Right? And he signed it for me, and I still, like, I've gotten rid of so much shit over the years. I'm not getting rid of that, right? Like, dude, it's so crazy. Yeah, man. Big feels.
Yeah, and he was such a great guy, like a genuinely great guy, and he was a huge EverQuest player. So again, he was somebody who knew what we were talking about and what we were doing. And he would argue, like, we'd talk about game design and stuff like that, and like he might have some idea, and we'd say, that wouldn't work because, and he would fight us on these, these kinds of things, but in a good way, not like, I'm R.A. Salvatore and you have to listen to me, but like, I'm a passionate gamer and this is what I care about. Like, why don't you do it this way instead of that way? And all this kind of stuff. So he loved learning from us, just as we were learning from him. And so, that was the thing about 38, was like, people might assume because, Kurt had all this money and he was backing us, that we would just have to do whatever he said, or that because it was R.A. Salvatore or Todd McFarlane involved, that we were, they would come down from the mountain with the stone tablets and tell us what to do. And it was totally not that at all. It was like these really great people who recognized that they didn't know everything. And so, they would give their ideas, but they would also listen to the people who knew how to make games. And so it was always a super just beneficial and kind of honest relationship on that regard. And there was never the huge ego or anything. It was really great.
So one of the questions that came up was basically asking just now, Dravik asked, can you say how close they were to moving into like a beta for the MMO? So help us understand what was going on with the MMO. And
there's been so much stuff in the press that is just wrong and just like ill-informed. So we like I said, we had a lot of time to build this world, this IP. And we knew from the beginning that we wanted to set out with something where, hey, we're going to make this MMO, but this MMO is going to be the first step in something larger. Like, we wanted to have this kind of franchise. And again, one of the benefits of having some, celebrities involved is, like, right from the beginning, you have people who want to talk movies and books and all those kinds of deals with you. So we had that advantage of interest on many levels. And so we had to kind of think about what we were building in that regard. And so I approached, like, I knew that, like, EverQuest had this timeline and this kind of history with these different historical periods. And there was a lot that wasn't very fleshed out. Like, it kind of was fleshed out when it needed to be. Like, when something needed to be built, they would figure out what the story was for that thing and then make it happen. And I wanted to take a more forward-thinking approach where we could build out this timeline of history, know what the beginning, what the end was, these major things that would happen along the way, and build this kind of structure such that the MMO was positioned at one certain point in time, but you could set other games at other points along the timeline. And we deliberately kind of made some of these historical periods that felt like, oh, that would be really good for like a single player RPG. This would be really good for an RTS. This would be really good for, all these kinds of things. Right. Just so that we had those hooks there. And it wasn't like we worked out every detail, because that would be too much. Like, you don't want to go so far that you write yourself into corners, but you want enough there such that if someone does come along and say, hey, we want to license your IP to set something here, you can give them a good amount of information.
Right.
And so, we had built up this MMO team. and uh, and then we learned through one of our kind of outside people who would eventually become one of our executives. We learned of this studio, Big Huge Games, down in Baltimore, that was it was a part of THQ, and THQ was cutting a bunch of their studios at the time, and this was going to be one of those studios.
Right.
And they said, well, they're building this RPG. They have an IP for it, but it's not something like they've kind of restarted it a couple times. It's not super solid, but they have a really good engine. And we'd always, like I said, at 38, we'd always talked about doing an RPG at some point after the MMO came out. And we looked at their technology and realized, wait a minute, they could deliver something before we're done with the MMO. So we could keep working on the MMO, have our MMO team up in Massachusetts, transitioning to Rhode Island, and we could get this Big Huge team and kind of get our IP plugged into that and have them build a game within the universe, and then use the RPG to kind of whet the appetites of the audience for the MMO. And so we met with the Big Huge Games team, and they could take our MMO assets and plug them into their RPG engine just to show us, like, from a tech side, hey, this is possible.
Right.
And we were all like, oh, this is great. And they were enthused about it. And of course, they wanted their team to stay together and keep working on this project. And so that became, we decided to acquire them. And that would become the game that would be Reckoning. And to be clear, they made all their own assets. They weren't using MMO assets for Reckoning at all, because we wanted it to be its own thing. But that was at least the kind of staging ground for that. And so as they were working on Reckoning, our MMO team kept going. And so we had servers, we had people making content, we had our art pipelines, we had zones made. We still had a long ways to go to finish things, but it was a game that we were doing play tests on. We had people making things like these, not only just regular zone quests and things like that. We had what we call an events team, where the big thing about the MMO was going to be a changing world. So we had built our story in a way where you could have a lot of player participation in these big events, and it could come out in one of two outcomes. And okay, we were careful in how we planned them, such that we weren't biting off too much at a time, but we wanted it to feel like you could change the world through the choices that you made, and that different servers could play out different storylines this way, while still all moving along this kind of path towards the big conclusion, the kind of finale of this first book of the MMO. So as far as like how far along we were in development, how much more time would we have needed? We still needed more time for sure, but we did things like bring in, there was a guild that we brought in and had them do play tests with us, and we were building a QA. We had QA. They were running through and testing stuff and making bugs. So it was a playable game. We just needed to do a bunch more to finish it.
Right. Okay. And then, so we heard a little bit about then how that wound down.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wouldn't say wound down so much as crashed the plane, because
yeah, I was being polite. Yes. I left that one door for you to open, I guess.
Yeah. So again, everything in this industry always happens in context. Like, nothing is super isolated. So when we started the studio, it was a time of great optimism in the MMO space. EverQuest had been a huge hit. World of Warcraft had blown the doors off of everything. And all of a sudden you had all these companies who were interested in starting MMOs because everybody wanted a piece of that action. And it felt like, for as much success as WoW is having, that must just be the beginning of this. And there could be other games that are doing, that will do even better than that. And the big announcement that had come out, I don't remember when they announced the game, but it was SWTOR, Star Wars: The Old Republic.
Right.
And so when they said, hey, we're going to do, BioWare is going to do an MMO set in the Star Wars universe, most people went, well, okay, that's it then. Like this is the dawn of the next age of MMOs, because they're going to make something so successful and awesome that it's just going to, like, all, a rising tide raises all boats. Like, it's going to be good for all of us. And so again, we were getting at 38, like, it was always a stream of people, talking to different investors and, potential, like, there would be people who would make offers to buy the company and all that kind of thing. But for Kurt, the thing that he was always trying to preserve on our behalf was our control of our launch date. So when you are in the games industry and you have a company, you probably have a publisher who controls when you are going to ship a product.
Right.
That's just how most game companies work. Like, you most of the time, you don't have control over that aspect. And sure, there's push and pull, and there's wiggle room, and there's negotiation and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the publisher has a plan of when they want certain products released, and you're beholden to that. And that's where, that's where a lot of compromise has to happen, because the game team can have the greatest ideas in the world, the greatest vision in the world, but ultimately they've got to launch something when their publisher wants them to launch something.
Yeah.
And
publisher, majority investor,
yeah,
whoever ultimately holds purse strings, and that's super sketchy.
And it is. And so that was the thing that, right or wrong, Kurt always wanted to maintain a controlling interest such that he could protect us and ensure that we launched when we felt it was right to launch. So it was nothing but the best of intentions from that regard. And so when you're doing that, it limits the kind of deals that you can make too, because a lot of investors want that power. They want to be able to say, no, I'm giving you tens, $100 million, whatever it is. I want control over this because I want to know what my investment is doing. And so we turned down an awful lot of offers because we felt like, well, if we can just get to a point where we can show people what we're making and we actually have a thing, then number one, you don't need as much money to get over the finish line. And number two, they can have more faith and confidence in you, and they'll say, okay, I'll give you 10 million from this guy, 10 million from them, 5 million from them, whatever it is. You can assemble enough of a coalition of investors that the company could still retain control. And so that was the intent of it. But again, nothing happens in a vacuum. And so what happened? Well, SWTOR launched, and while it was a big launch, it wasn't what EA thought it was going to be. And there were a bunch of other companies in the space that kind of bubble started bursting of, hey, there had been a bunch of startups or like companies thinking they could make MMOs, and they learned it was a lot harder than they thought it was. And all of a sudden the air started going out of that space in an investment sense.
Yeah.
And that just hurt our chances of being able to finish. And frankly, that's what drove to the Rhode Island deal. Was this this opportunity where the state wanted to build an what would I call it, like a tech infrastructure in Providence, and so they were willing to. It was never government money. It was never tax dollars or anything that was loaned to us. It was them setting up a loan program for us to borrow that money from banks, and them being one of the guarantors on that loan. So they kind of facilitated that process. And we said from the beginning that money wasn't going to be enough to get us over the finish line. We were going to need more. It was supposed to be a $75 million deal. They gave us about 50 million of it. And so we were always kind of, it was a race to try and get more investors on board and get enough money to get to the finish line. And we had Reckoning come out, and Reckoning was awesome, and it had a lot of support in the fan community, and it met the expectations of what was predicted for a first RPG. It sold like 1.2 million copies. That had been the prediction, was 1.2 million copies. We knew it wasn't gonna.
People loved it. Yeah,
it's one of the things now. THQ Nordic is rebooting it and re-releasing it because there was such fan support for it. The Big Huge Games team did an awesome job on it, and it was super gratifying to I had a lot of interactions with them because I was kind of, by that point, I was the creative director for the IP. And so I was there checking to make sure that the work that they were doing, all the things that they were proposing, would fit within the IP and help us build, again, because we knew the MMO was going to be like the big ticket thing. But the governor of Rhode Island changed. This new guy came in, and he was not a fan of the deal that Rhode Island had made. And from the very beginning, he was out to to insulate himself from it, and ensure that no blowback came to him. And like I said, it felt like a plane crash because everything had been going along pretty normally through April of 2012. Reckoning had come out earlier that year. Big Huge team was already starting pre-production on what would have been Reckoning 2. They had awesome ideas. They had some great engine developments, some great story ideas that I was working with them on. Again, we had this timeline of history that was just ideal for them to continue making RPGs, and it could be their own space that would inform stuff in the MMO, but not compete with it.
Yeah, makes sense.
So it was very gratifying in that regard, and it felt really good. And then May 1st, we would get paid on the 1st and the 15th. And May 1st, there was no paycheck in the bank account. And we said, well, what's going on? And there was supposed to be some tax credits that we got from the state that we could use to leverage to bring money in. And they said, nope, you can't have those tax credits now. We're not going to do that. And so we started, Kurt, the other executives started scrambling to make up for that money. And then the governor went to the press and said, nope, there's a problem here. They're not making a payment that they're supposed to make on the interest for this loan. And that's just when like news broke open.
Right.
And we were very close to finishing a deal for the second RPG, and that fell apart. And because of that news coming out, and then it just became this kind of race to do what we, to find somebody who could come in and help us out. And
so, can you say how many people were there? Because at that point, that money that's funding, was that funding both like the Big Huge Game stuff and your studio directly? Like, how many people in total were affected? Because that sounds like a pretty big burn. Like,
it was a big burn. And when we say burn, we mean the amount of money the company is spending to keep its doors open and pay its people. So yeah, it was, man, I'm gonna probably butcher the number of people. I want to say Big Huge had 100 plus people down there in their studio. And we were contractually obligated by the terms of our loan, because again, Rhode Island wanted to build a tech sector. And so they wanted us hiring at a certain rate. So we had, maybe 300 people around in Rhode Island at that time. So it was a big burn rate that we had. And so there were a lot of mistakes made. Like, I'm not excusing anybody's business practices. And no matter how good your intentions are, if you're not building your business plan smartly to take care of people and make sure that if things go wrong, that they have, that they can be at least, have some runway to get out of there, then you're doing it wrong. And it was done wrong. And
and one of the reasons why I asked is that runway. I mean, when you've got 400 plus people that you're supporting, you've got to have a huge war chest to be able to sustain that for any period of time, right? I mean,
yeah.
So that makes it just like an instant problem.
It became an instant problem. And that's why things unraveled so quickly. It was, like I said, we all knew that we needed money. Like that was a constant thing with the studio, was like, yeah, we need to keep making our thing. But we felt pretty good about our chances, especially the closer that we got to having a finished game, the better we felt like our odds were. Because of course, if somebody can come in and buy a chunk of the company for, $20 million or something like that. If you have a game that's about to come out, you have pretty good odds of that happening. But with all this stuff in the press, with all the things that were being said and going on, and it just unraveled so quickly. And so our first real indication for most people was the beginning of the month, and by the 24th of the month, we shut the doors, and everybody just had to disperse and figure out what they were going to do with their lives. And it took an incredible toll on everybody. There was nobody who was not suffering in that place, because everybody was so committed and had such genuine love for the studio, for what we were building, for what our future could be, that it was really devastating. And again, I don't mean to minimize these things by comparing it to something, but it did feel like a loved one, or like a friend had been lost. Like it had that tangible sense of loss, and all of us went through a period of real grieving, for what had fallen apart. And what makes it tougher is you can't just sit there with your head in your hands and mourn the loss. You've got to immediately feed your family, and you've got to figure out.
Scrambling.
Yeah, you're already scrambling. Like I would have loved to stay in Rhode Island for years and live there. I had a house, loved the area, super great people, and I had to start. I got to sell this house. I got to find a job somewhere. I got to look for what's next after this.
I mean, the picture you paint, like when you talk about it, like Uncle Billy's out there fishing. You got a nice small town that you can hang out in. It's a decent area. You got a badass, beautiful studio. You're making the game of your dreams. It's actually coming along. That's a rough one to have it just overnight sort of bit flip, and it's like, oh shit, we're scrambling. So it's definitely, I think it's fair to, point to how traumatic that is. That is definitely a traumatic moment. It's rough on you, it's rough on the family, all of that stuff. So there's a question in chat that, like, I do think it's interesting for this specific timing. That's do you know what happened with the MMO assets and the property and stuff like that? And the reason why I think it's interesting is because you got something you poured everything into. Did it just disappear? Is it held somewhere? Does it have any potential of ever seeing?
Right. So, and this is one of those things that was so hard, because like, as soon as the studio closes, right? Like we had to leave. We took the stuff that we could carry, our things that we could carry. And you kind of like, again, a day burned into my memory. Walking out of that building, we had a little parking garage downstairs, going down to the garage, saying goodbyes to people. Everybody's got their arms loaded with stuff. But walking out of the office space that we had built, like, the whole process of moving to Rhode Island, we found a building, we renovated the building, we saw the offices come together, everybody moved into that space. Again, that sense of camaraderie and building something. Now you're walking out of that, and everything's still there. Like, the computers are still there, the artwork, what other than some things that we grabbed to take with us, but like there's still artwork on the walls. It still feels like the space that you built, that you love. Right. It's like having to leave your home, and as if you had to walk away and just leave the shit in there. And then in the days that followed, every day on the news was all about the latest on 38 Studios. Well, they've brought in someone to oversee the auction of the assets, and they're going to divide up. There were hardware auctions where people were coming in buying our PCs, and they were buying the artwork and all this kind of stuff. And one of the big things was the IP, of course. That was the biggest piece of the puzzle. And, none of us were brought into that process of what the legal people from Rhode Island wanted to do, because all those assets went to Rhode Island because they were the guarantor on the loan. So it was their job to sell them off to try and recoup some of that money. And they could do that just fine for the hardware stuff, but the IP itself was always the white whale. And so all the IP, everything from, the code for Reckoning, the code for the MMO, all the art assets that were in the pipeline, we had this massive confluence of information that kind of laid out the prospects for multiple games. All of that stuff was the IP. And for whatever reason, I think from what I heard, and again, this is only secondhand, but from people that I know that tried to buy the IP, they were asking like kind of an outrageous amount of money for it. And so the IP just sat on hard drives for years, and so it was such a tragic. Sorry, it's hard to talk about, but one of our guys who had been one of our server admins was hired by the state of Rhode Island to help make sure that servers were running. Because if anybody wanted to come in and see the assets, like somebody needs to be able to show it to them. And the lawyer's not going to know how to do any of that shit. So they kept one of our server guys there. And he used to post pictures of himself sitting in the room where we had our team meetings alone on a chair in front of an empty stage, and just heartbreaking. And he did his best. He was such a great guy, and he did such his best, but he felt like he was the custodian, like the last guy in Amalur who was keeping the lights on. And he ended up dying of cancer a few years later. And it just felt like that was the last guy holding the lights on. And that was really tough. And so the IP just languished for years on hard drives. And then kind of out of the blue one day, somebody pings me and is like, "Did you see the news today? Did you see the news?" And I look, and there was an announcement that THQ Nordic had acquired the IP. And that was, of course, like, that makes my heart race at that time, because we'd always felt like there was so much potential there. And well, what is this studio going to do with that? And again, it was a process of like, they didn't want to. They kind of talked to a few people from 38 about it, or from Big Huge about it. But it wasn't like they were trying to reassemble the team or anything like that. They wanted to do their own thing with it. Perfectly understandable. And then it was a long time later. It was only, this year, right? Yeah, it had to be 2020. What a nightmare this year has been. But
it wasn't that long ago that the announcement was made.
Yeah, so they announced the Reckoning. That name, but it's exciting to see them making, because there were a lot of improvements. The thing with Reckoning was, the people love the world, they love the setting, all that stuff. There were some bugs, of course, with any game that gets released, and the team was readying this patch to address a bunch of camera issues, a bunch of balance issues, all this stuff, and the plug got pulled just before that patch could go out to the public. So I'm sure that some amount of those fixes and things have been incorporated into Reckoning, and so that's pretty exciting. So it'll be good to see that come out the way that we wanted it to be, and I think they're up-resing stuff and all that kind of thing.
Well, it's an interesting time too, because Rylar just asked in chat, I wonder if THQ Nordic will make the MMO. It's interesting because even if they don't make the MMO, and feel free to disagree with this perspective, but with the basically, I would say in the last maybe 5 years or so, everything as it shifts to games as a service and everything looks at a live ops focus, and then over time as people are getting away from loot boxes and things like that, and they're looking at Battle Pass and Season Pass, which is basically just an opt-in subscription. More and more subscriptions don't look crazy anymore. Games as a service don't look crazy anymore. And it's like, well, they're making everything's basically an MMO of sorts. Yeah. And so then the potential, like, I'm sure if they're looking at, properties like this, it's like, I've noticed there is that buzz about IP, there's that buzz about, games that can sustain a nice live ops no matter what the size. I know mergers and acquisitions have been like crazy over the
Mhm.
last few years. So the possibilities there, I guess.
Yeah, certainly. And I obviously I can't speak for THQ Nordic or whatever they, um, what I would say, obviously, as you know, MMOs are incredibly complicated to run, and so even though they have the code and they have the assets and all those things, like they would need somebody to be able to
Oh, for
figure that
sure.
stuff out and get all that stuff working. And then like even if they did that, even if they got all like our Amalur servers running and stuff like that, you've still
Yeah.
got the challenge of well, number one, that's 2012 technology,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's 2020, so there's some things there. The art actually holds up really well. If you there's some leaked stuff on YouTube. I probably shouldn't say, but I have lots of stuff. Um,
Yeah, I've seen some leaked stuff here and there. I've seen
yeah,
some people have gotten some evidence out over time.
yeah.
Yeah,
The
and don't get me wrong. I don't think it's. That's why I said A instead of the MMO.
yeah.
I think they would, if they wanted to do that, they'd probably have to go back to the drawing board. It's not plug and play, but
Yeah, it would certainly give somebody a head start, though. Like that was one of the things. Like if you were gonna, and again, like if there's all these potential ifs, but if somebody like back in 2012, if Rhode Island had asked a reasonable price for the amount of assets they had, somebody could have come in and said, "Hey, I'm just going to buy because I've got zones made, I've got characters made, I got creatures made. I'll take all that stuff, and maybe I have to build my own back end or plug it into something else or whatever, so that I can understand how it all works." But it would have given a head start to somebody, and they could have
yeah.
chosen to follow the IP as we'd laid it out or not. Um, so, I have to think that there was some prohibitive cost involved for somebody to go, you know what? As much as a head start that could give us for a team to actually build something workable, it's not worth the money that they're asking for it. So um, I don't have a lot of confidence that Rhode Island really understood the gaming business enough to be asking the right amount of money for that sort of stuff. So
Well, honestly, it's that thing that people that have the IP do, because I've heard of some older MMOs or properties that have gone dormant, and then when you talk about what would it take to potentially buy that and bring it back, it's always like, if you think there's value here, then I think there's a shitload of value, right? Like
mhm.
if you're asking me if you can buy it, I'm going to give you a ridiculous price. Otherwise, I'll just sit on it because it's not costing me anything, right? So
Sure, sure.
yeah, all right.
Yeah.
I mean,
So could they do something with it? They
yeah,
could. Does it seem likely? I don't know.
dude,
I can't speak for them.
Rhode Island is only like 500 people. There were already 300 of you, and you had 100 homies like in support. You guys,
Uh-huh.
you should have just taken it by force. Thumb drives all around. I would have been walking out, and then what you do is you just put fake mustaches on stuff. You put a We're gonna do that. We're making EverQuest. No one's gonna know, but we in chat are
there,
making it.
there were people from the company who looked into at least putting money together and trying to buy the IP back, and it was always prohibitive for that regard. But one of the untold stories about every 38 story talks about the debacle. Like if you Google 38 Studios, most of the results will have the word debacle in it somewhere, which I think is a real shame because for the most part it was great. And like I referenced this idea that Rhode Island had about building a tech sector and all that. It was starting to work. Like we moved into a downtown that was not completely fallen apart, but it was not in a great space.
Right.
And new restaurants started opening up, and the restaurants started hiring more people. And when you just have that influx of people, it starts bringing more business to the area, and things were starting to revitalize, and that downtown was really shaping up to be awesome. It was a beautiful place. Providence is a beautiful area. And that's one of the untold tragedies of that, is that, once we closed down, it had these ripple effects on the surrounding area. And so there was, again, you can probably Google and find this if you worked hard enough, but like, as from that period of May 1st to May 24th, we would have to walk to our building, and there were reporters outside 24/7, just camped there all the time. And of course, we were walking past and telling, just no comment and just not saying anything, not saying anything. And one day towards the end, I was running the gauntlet of reporters again, kind of walking through, and they're all just like putting microphones on me or whatever. And finally, I just, like, something told me to just stop, and I just stopped and I started talking to them, and I said, basically, we had something really cool here, and if the governor doesn't want to help us, fix this or get us back on track, whatever it is, he's affecting not just the hundreds of people who work here, but all the people in Providence who thrive because of our presence here. And I just really felt like we were being let down, which is, it's done. It's all business and all that kind of thing. But like, there could have been ways to make this work and to keep 38 going for a bit longer and maybe get us over the finish line. Who knows? But
Right.
I definitely felt like there was a political thing going on that was affecting not only us, but a bunch of innocent people in Rhode Island who still bear scars to this day because of the losses that they endured because of what happened to us. And that's a real shame. And I wish that story got told more, and that people took the bigger picture rather than, everybody loves the story of a business gone wrong, and there's people like,
especially if it's got like a high profile dude and there's controversy and blah blah, and so it's been nice having you and Travis to be able to come in and like paint a different picture on that. It's been very helpful. Because I was close to a few people there, just in that we're in the network, et cetera, and it still wasn't a story that was clear to me. So it's been awesome to hear it, even though it is, I could tell, like, when he spoke about it, you could tell it was hard. It's clearly hard for you. Even like, I'm trying to think. So there were a few other people that I knew up there that I saw on their like social media and stuff. I think Niraj, he was up there, animator, and like, and so everybody basically has conveyed the same thing. Mm-hmm. So, all right, man. Like, this one's a tough one, and then from there you.
So from there, I had. Again, it was kind of a downtime in the games industry. So there were I was looking around for the right fit, and it was a little tough to find things. A bunch of the 38 team, engineers always get swept up. Like, oh, there's engineers on the market. Yep, come on, bring them on. So there was BioShock Infinite was in development, so there were a number of artists and engineers, I think, that got picked up by them. There was WildStar was in development at the time. They ended up hiring a bunch of our people. Some people went to Blizzard right from the beginning. And I was kind of looking around and unsure of what I wanted to do. Again, having been so close to the inner workings of 38, I was really dealing with a lot of emotional pain and fallout from that. And I was like, do I even, number one, should I even keep working in games anymore? Right. Number two, should I even work in MMOs anymore? And I was kind of looking around, and I was actually talking to Netherstorm in Chicago that makes Mortal Kombat. And I interviewed with them, and they had a different project in the works at the time. And I thought, well, that's an interesting change of pace. Maybe I could do something with that. And so I was considering something like that. And then I got a call from John Smedley. And he said, in typical Smed fashion, like, hey, you need to come back to SOE. I need you out here. We've got some stuff in the works. EverQuest Next was being talked about at that point. Smed had made a number of trips out. He was like a regular visitor at 38 Studios. He would come out and help be a good soundboard. He was always super nice. He was one of those guys that was friendly and helpful, and I always felt like I had a good relationship with him. And so to have him call me, and I'm like, I don't know, Smed, I've got this other deal. Like maybe he's like, no, you need to work on MMOs. MMOs are what you were made to work on. I need you to come out here and work on stuff. And he said, we're still figuring out the EverQuest Next team, so you're not going to go on that right away. But we've just rebooted Vanguard, and we need a creative director for that. And so you'll just go on that for a while, and then we'll transition you over to EverQuest Next. And so I thought, well, he's probably right. Maybe I am just meant to work on MMOs and that kind of thing. So I ended up going back to SOE, and so that was 2012, late 2012, that I moved back to San Diego once again, and went to work and started working on Vanguard. And boy, was that a change of pace. Because there, again, going from what had been at 38, this high profile, high expectation kind of thing, to go to Vanguard and being like, well, we went free to play on it and it's starting to make some money for us. So let's see what we can do with this, and let's see what support we can give. So they had built up a team. There was a time when Vanguard was down to like basically one person working on it, I think. And then, now we had a team. And so I had a bunch of designers that were working for me, and we were trying to like figure out what we needed to do to make some new content for that game and keep the kind of the bit of momentum that had been built by going free to play, to try to keep that going and see if we could make something out of that game.
Can I ask, and you don't have to be specific, I know that's but so, because I watched when the free to play transition was going on as an outsider, with the Sony stuff, including DCO, which I did work on, shipped, but then we had layoffs and I was out of there 2011, and so like I understood the business model that we had to go with on that one. We actually, before, like while designing it, we wanted to go sort of a form of free to play with it, focused on cosmetics because superheroes. But we were also just kind of wondering about console and will they pay a sub and all this other stuff and some other complications.
Mm-hmm.
So when I heard it went free to play after the fact, and then when I heard these other games went free to play, knowing sort of what it takes to transition that business model and make it viable, I'm curious, because we'd see like press announcements where it's like, since we went free to play, we've made 400% more money or 700% more money. It's like, okay, but that could be $7, right? Like, and so I'm not asking this specific number, but what I am wondering is, did that transition, just as purely academic, it's not specific to this game, did that transition, was it, okay, so now at least there's some income coming in and we can hire some people? Was it fairly significant? It was like, okay, we could use this to build a roadmap, or like, can you help me understand the scope?
Yeah, what I would, again, I don't remember the specific numbers, but how it was explained to me, basically, again, like, Vanguard was a game that had all those expectations, and through a terrible launch and a bunch of, bad technology behind it, its player base dwindled down to very few people. But there were diehards playing that game and who were subscribers to that game. And when they went free to play, they had solved, at least, they had fixed a lot of the bigger tech issues, that it was at least a playable game. I'll always remember when SOE acquired Sigil and was going to publish Vanguard. like a bunch of us on the EQ2 team had mixed feelings because we had to deal, like as community manager, I had to deal with a lot of fans talking shit about EQ2 because they were like, oh, they're going to make the real EverQuest 2 over at Sigil, and Vanguard is the real successor to EverQuest and all that. And had to deal with that for a number of years. And then after SOE acquired it, I logged in to Vanguard, and I thought, okay, well, now we've got builds, and I can see what's going on in here. And I get in there, and I'm on, I made a character called Morgard, and I'm running around in the world, and all of a sudden I get pinged by a chat message, and it's Eridune, Brad McQuaid, and Brad's like, "Hey, what do you think? What's going on?" And if the game was not performing particularly well, and so, but I was trying to be nice. I'm like, "Oh, this is, the art looks great. I think this is awesome," or whatever. He's like, "Let me show you something. I got a boat here. Let me summon you to my boat, and we'll sail around because you got to see this world. It's really cool." And so he summons me to the boat, and like it's glitching out, and like the boat keeps disappearing, and my guy keeps falling into the water and popping back up, like all the terrible server performance and whatever. And he's trying to sail us across like a chunk line from one thing to another, and like I probably got disconnected or something, like just like untenable. So by the time I got there, they had fixed that kind of stuff. Like it still wasn't the smoothest MMO in the world by any means, but like it could run and it was stable and people were playing it. And there was like this one super raid zone that had been built. People will remember if they're Vanguard fans in chat what that place was called. I can't remember. It had a cool name, but they had like raided that for no, it wasn't wasn't there something even beyond the APW? There was like another one after that, I thought. Maybe it was something about the gods or something. Anyway, so I get there, and they talked about the numbers, and it was significant enough that from whatever SOE had paid to acquire the game, it had never been profitable up to that point. And when they went free to play, it started to make money. Like it had paid for the acquisition and all that stuff.
Okay.
So they had enough actual profit to hire people and put a team on that. And we had a couple artists, and we had probably like 5 design people, and we had 1 full-time engineer, and then a apprentice engineer for that. And so like there was effort to being like, okay, let's see what we can do with this. And they weren't staffing up a huge team or anything, but it was at least enough that it felt like, okay, well, let's do something with this.
Yeah, it makes sense. The company before the last one I was at was like my first real dose of free to play on an older live game, and I was actually pretty shocked at the amount of money this old ass Flash web-based game was generating at the time. And looking at the KPIs on that one versus the last company I was at and some previous experiences, it seems like the smaller games, if you can somehow figure out, like in that case, whatever they were providing for the free to play sort of monetization option, like if you can hit it, there's a sustainable amount of money to be made there. It's just finding it. So yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, cool. That's the thing that people don't always think about in terms of the audience and the player base, and people talk trash about different games and whatever. But like to your point, like if you can find an audience that's willing to keep playing your game, that loves that game for what it is, and you can find that right balance of how many people do we need to pay to keep working on this versus how much money can we take in. If you can get that balance to where it is healthy for the company to keep bringing in money, then that game can keep going. And people can make a nice living off that game because of the revenue model. But there was that point, when the transition, when SOE started transitioning their games to free to play, it felt like free to play was the next big thing. Like that was that was the way all these games were going to go. And it's interesting in the years since to see that actually Game Pass subscription models, that's still a super viable way for a lot of people if you have the product that supports that. I think it's whatever best fits the game itself. There is no one size fits all in terms of business models.
Yeah. Yep. No, I agree. And so then you're on Vanguard.
So I'm on Vanguard, and we did our best. I loved engaging with the fans. Again, it was a small community, but they were super dedicated. My first fanfare after being back, I got to meet a bunch of those people. They baked cookies. It was super nice. They were super kind. They just wanted, they had a lot of ideas about what could make the game better. And we tried to do some of those things, but the tools for Vanguard were just like antiques. They were from the antique shop, and there were only a few people who knew really how to do stuff in those tools. And I'm trying to figure it out, but it's a kind of a mess. And there was so much complicated infrastructure, just in terms of like, if you wanted to add content to the game, it was a big undertaking. If you wanted to change the numbers of something, you could like change one little value here, and infinite things could break from those little tweaks. So it was a huge uphill battle. And so one of the things that I tried to do was I'm like, well, let's make a plan for how can we build something that can add some new content over a process of months, and how can we kind of start small, build up to something. There were a couple unused zones. There was some, I can't remember the name anymore, some treasure place, like some Aladdin's lamp kind of thing. We were able to add that zone fairly easily. But anything after that had only been partially finished before, and it was just a struggle to get anything made. And I think that the initial free-to-play stuff had success because there were a number of cosmetic things that had been made in terms of armors and mounts, things that hadn't been put into the game yet. And so those could be put on treasure boxes and things like that. And people were buying keys to the treasure boxes so that they could collect. Yeah, they could collect and complete their collection. And then once those things started running out, that's when the free-to-play trajectory started to not be as favorable anymore.
Yeah, it looked like it. So Onid7 said, Araz Inkur, Temple of Tahatamani.
I will believe you, because that sounds about the right name, but I can't tell. I think there was a common name, City of Gold, was one of the places that we added. And there was some big dark elf citadel that was gonna be our big content plan. There was this big place that had been built in the world that was largely empty, and we thought, okay, perfect. Well, at least most of the art is there. We can populate it. We figured out a story that was going to unfold over a series of updates, and okay, we can build that. Vanguard didn't have very good revision control or anything like that, so it was a little bit seat of our pants there kind of thing. But we thought, okay, we'll have this plan and we'll build it out. Well, the reason that area had never been populated was it was sitting at the intersection of some chunk lines, and that was still the big thing, that the servers were slow on conveying information. And so we tried populating that, and it just things broke, and there was all this stuff that was really difficult about it. And we tried, and it just wasn't providing the results that we wanted. And around that time is when positions were starting to open up on EverQuest Next, and they wanted to move me over to that. So I got shifted off of that to EQ Next, and the Vanguard team was still there and still kept trying to do stuff, but it was gradually being whittled down as profits from the free-to-play stuff were winding down as well. So it just wasn't sustainable.
All right. And boom, transition,
EverQuest Next. And
people are going to have questions, I think, on this one. So what we'll do is I will folks in chat, I'll try to basically queue them up if they pop up. Or honestly, Steve, if you see them pop up and want to grab them, just go for it. If you can, since we do a lot of audio, you know, a lot of people listen to this. If you want, read the question and answer it, or yeah.
Sure. I'll
Or you
give
can
you
just
my.
tell your story, dude. Just tell your story. We'll figure this shit out.
I'll tell my story to begin with, and maybe we'll have some time to take some questions too. But yeah, so I came on EverQuest Next, and you know, I had known about EverQuest Next at 38. Smed had talked about it, and of course, the way Smed talks about games, when he describes a game to you, it's the game of games, and it's going to be everything. And EverQuest, it's going to be the greatest thing. We've got all this, we got blah blah blah. It's all the best of EverQuest. It's new stuff, blah blah blah. It's awesome. And of course, I get on the game, and well, there's nothing really there. Like, it's still being planned. It's still being, you know, there's some tech demos. And it was much like when I got onto EverQuest 2, and I assumed that things would be much farther along than they were. And they were not, because the project had started, it had gone a certain distance, got, you know, rebooted back to the beginning. There was going to be an EverQuest, you know, was it EverQuest 3? It was still struggling to find out what it was going to be. But what they had figured out by the time I got there was they had licensed this voxel engine, and so they'd become convinced. You know, Minecraft was big at that point. Terraria was a big game that really influenced the team, and there was a lot of thinking of, man, if we could get this voxel stuff to work, we could have this world that could literally be changed by the players. And we could do these big events that physically change the terrain. You could have combat that blew holes and stuff, and, you know, repair itself later, like all that kind of stuff. It seemed
People could
like
build penises everywhere.
Penises for miles. Just imagine it, a big field
like an H.R. Geiger landscape
of penises. Yes, Geiger-esque penises everywhere. So that was cool, but what wasn't figured out was, okay, that's a feature, like that's part of the game. What is the actual play of it, and what is this world like? What does it mean to do an EverQuest Next? And there were some things that had been laid down for the story that felt strange to me, because they had diverged from what I felt like was the logical thing to do. Which, like, to me, if you said, hey, build an EverQuest Next, what would I do? I would look at the core of the original game, which was Launch, Kunark, and Velius. And, like, if you have that, like, that is an awesome game right there. Like, that was EverQuest in its prime. So
you would make EverQuest Next.
I would make EverQuest. The next version of EverQuest.
Amazing.
Is what I would make. I know it was a heretical concept at the time, because again, like, I can't speak for everyone, and I don't want to but there were people on that team who didn't want to make another EverQuest, who wanted to make something completely different from that. And so that kind of philosophical divide is very hard when you have that in a team. And you're kind of fighting that, yeah, but this is the EverQuest DNA. Well, we can do something different, or we could do something, you know, blah blah blah. And by that point, there had been a lot of other games that had come out, and so you know, there were people who were very enamored with Borderlands and those kinds of games. And so, what if we made you know, Terraria meets Borderlands meets, well, I guess there'll be some EverQuest, and you know, it was all one of those kinds of things of, like, they still needed to figure out what the core of the game was going to be. And so
right.
So that was a hurdle to overcome. And then there was just like, hey, how are we going to do this, and how can we ship a game in the SOE of that day? And SOE was a very different company at that point than the one that I had left. You know, a lot of folks like you had been long gone. Hartzman had been long gone, moved on to Tryon and other things. and there were a few people that were there that I remembered from the old days, but it just felt very different and had kind of a different mindset. That also had, Free Realms, which was a big project for SOE, and that hadn't gone as well. That had been kind of shuttered. Star Wars Galaxies had endured its troubles and a reboot and all that kind of stuff. So it was a different atmosphere, and it wasn't, like I just didn't feel the same kind of energy as when I had got there for EverQuest 2. And it's understandable because it's different people, and I was getting to know different people that I hadn't worked with before. So it was just a different process than probably what I was expecting. And so then, because the voxel stuff was kind of farther along than the design of the game, at some point the idea came up to do we could do this landmark thing where we take, we could call it EverQuest Next Landmark, and we could take the voxel building stuff, make it its own little spin-off project, and while we continue working on EverQuest Next, the MMO. And so because of the kind of, I do more story design and world building and stuff like that, most of my time there was spent on EverQuest Next stuff, because it was, again, kind of building the IP and figuring out how to inject enough of the EverQuest DNA into stuff to make it feel like, no, this is Norath, this is the world. It's just a different interpretation of it. While on the engineering side, a lot of work was being put in to make Landmark a viable thing. And the idea had been that, people will engage with Landmark, they'll use it as a building tool, they'll build cool art that will inform what we put into EverQuest Next, and it'll make this cool ecosystem of stuff. And of course, things didn't work out that way, because Landmark had its own kinds of struggles and issues, and getting players to engage with it was tough. It was way harder to build things in that game than Minecraft or similar things. So there was a huge learning curve, and we had a small number of people who were making masterpieces with that game, who just built incredible things that would fill us with awe. We did a live stream kind of thing, showing off the work of the community. And that was one of the most gratifying parts of that job, because people were really buying into that part of it, but it was just such a small number of people. And that was the...
It's interesting when you see because I don't know if I'll be able to say this and not have it taken out of context. Player generated content is definitely viable, right? Clearly, obviously, I'm not saying that, but it's interesting how many companies kind of fall back on, rather than think about how to make a viable business model or look at the right fidelity of content in order to put out, company generated content, directed sort of experiences that you produce. There's always that sort of fallback on, how do we get away from making quests and story and shit and let the players do that, because it'll be cheaper and more sustainable, as opposed to just figure out how to make cheaper, more sustainable fucking I typically don't use the F word here, but this is a passion area. Content, right? Think ahead a little bit, guys. And so it's and every time there's that allure of, we're going to do fully cinematic, highly rendered, sophisticated storylines based on one of the biggest IPs in the world, and it only took us 800 people to ship, and then we're going to have a live ops that's going to put out expansion. And I was like, I mean, I can blow that smoke up your ass as well if you want to give me money, but we're not going to have a product that's around in X number of years, right?
Yeah.
So, so when you say, the thing that triggered this is when you say there was a small number of people, a very small number of people that made badass content. Yeah, those are the people you hire. Mm-hmm. Those are called game developers. Bring them in, give them a job, have them make stuff, and then there you go. It's not voodoo, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's
me, Steve. Damn.
Well, what are the odds? What are the odds?
What are the odds of me getting triggered?
And yeah, that should have been the way that it worked, but it wasn't, for a variety of reasons. Remember, at that time, SOE was on the sale block, so there was and I don't know all the inner workings of Sony at the time and how they felt about SOE and all that kind of stuff. But there was an effort to sell the company, and so there were like we had that hanging over our heads as well. So it wasn't like they were going to ramp up a big team under that circumstances.
Right.
And so there were always rumors swirling of a buyer here, a buyer there, the studio buying us or whatever. And then ultimately, it was this investment group that ended up coming in and buying it and transitioning it into Daybreak Games at the time. And by that point, Landmark had at least been, I forget what release it was called, if it actually launched or if it was always early access. To be frank, like I was really focused on I just wanted to work on the game, man. I didn't want to care about the business of it at that point.
And because you're in a context then that no matter what's going on behind the scenes organizationally, no matter what's going on with the actual tech or sort of where you're at with the product, you have your hands on EverQuest again. Mm-hmm. Like it's a tough one, man. There's like an allure to that. Like we talk about it all the time. If Bezos would come in and plop down a bag of money, like I would be all over Norath, right? Like,
so I was. I'll do another aside here because so I was if you were a big fan of late night TV in the 90s, I guess, like when Johnny Carson was going to retire, there was a big thing over who was going to take over for Johnny Carson. And there was the camp that was like, oh, David Letterman's going to come in and take over for him. And like, it seemed like that was how it was going to go. And then NBC got cold feet and they said, no, we're going to go with Jay Leno instead. And Letterman was hurt and all this kind of stuff. And if you like, there was this, one of the movies made about the late night wars at the time. There was the scene that always stuck in my mind because like CBS had come to Letterman and they said, we're going to give you all this money. You can make your own show. You can be whatever you want. We'll just give you what you want. Just make the show. And Letterman's all into that. And then NBC panicked and they came to him and they said, okay, we've changed our minds. We'll oust Leno. You can have the Tonight Show, but we're going to own it. But you can run the Tonight Show. And there's the scene where Letterman goes and talks to his manager about it. And he is so torn because he loved the Tonight Show. The Tonight Show was all he ever wanted to work on. And he just wanted to be the host of the Tonight Show. That was his life's goal. And his manager said, Dave, they're never going to let you own it. You're only going to be a hired employee for that show. But over here, CBS will give you your own show and let you make it what you want it to be. Don't be an idiot. Take the CBS deal. And that's ultimately what he did. But it was so tempting. And so even when I was at 38 and we had this dream that I was living and all these people, when Smed would come and talk about EverQuest Next, there was a part of me that was like, I kind of want to take that deal. Like, even though it's like, what could I do on that game? Like, what could I, like, that was the one thing that was like, man, if I could work on that and make the EverQuest we all wanted it to be, that's super alluring. That's exactly what you're talking about there. Yep. Like, it was an intoxicating kind of opportunity.
Yeah. So while we're still on this topic, two questions came up. One of them seems a bit rhetorical, but I ask it anyway. Mm-hmm. But so Rhett had asked, did Storybricks ever really have a chance of being part of EQ Next?
So I got to work with the Storybricks guys a lot because they spent a lot of time in the studio. Hey, look at that, a question popping up.
Yeah, it's new. You're the first person to get this treatment. We'll see. The formatting's a bit ugly. It's a bit big and weird, but you can read it.
So I'm still friends with two of the main guys from Storybricks and Brian Green, who we just lost recently. He was a part of Storybricks for a while too. Sad loss there, but so like I spent a lot of time working with them because they had a great system of when we finally got to like, okay, what is the game that we were going to make? We really felt like we could leverage that kind of procedural content, and that's kind of a dirty word, like that has a lot of negative connotations to it, but like what we were trying to do was build a story framework for this world that would work with the kind of AI systems that they had, such that you could create an area that felt like Norath and had the population of of EverQuest in it, and you could give drives to these different groups like the orcs or the Ashen Order or all these kinds of things. And we built these very kind of sophisticated trees of wants and desires and drives, and putting them into this area that, with the voxel-based terrain and things like that, you could have these groups come in and change up the landscape and change villages and have all this kind of stuff play out. And it was very promising. Like, it never was built. Like, on the AI side, they could run the simulation and show what was going to happen, but it never got hooked up enough into the engine to make an actual game out of that. All the stuff that you saw of EverQuest Next gameplay was not using that Storybricks technology in it, but like, in theory it was there, and it was like, I found it very interesting. It was a cool opportunity as a storyteller to be able to think of story in a different way, in a much more modular way. And for us, then, it became about kind of creating these different scenarios that could play out. And it was almost like, if you could take these different groups, like almost have a Mad Libs kind of style of, well, what happens if I take this group with its wants and desires and this group over here? What happens there versus this group and this group? And it became an interesting thought exercise, and it had potential.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. And again, is one of those like, hey, maybe this is a way where we don't have to spend all this money on people making handcrafted stuff all the time. So you could make a certain amount of handcrafted stuff, combine it with this procedural AI-driven kind of thing and the voxel stuff, and see how that would work as a game. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had a discussion a little bit behind the scenes here as well. Again, I'm not against player-generated stuff, and the idea of like having players facilitate things like reminiscent of the old GM events and things like that, right? I think there's opportunity, as long as the bulk of what you're putting forward is a world that you've crafted and you've established a framework for that additional storytelling in.
Exactly.
The question that came up, Zoidberg, I'm going to rephrase your question a little bit, but essentially it goes back to the topic you were hitting on a little bit there with regards to the desire to make something new. Did you have a good sense of why there is such a straying from the original sort of EQ and the thing that by then was still working, right? Like EQ still chugging along. At that point, hell, it's chugging along 21 years later. So I'm assuming it was still doing fine then. Was it again another situation of, well, we already got an EQ, and so why make another EQ?
No, it was like, I can't articulate it as well, as clearly as I could the EverQuest 2 story, because there was so much that had gone on before I got onto that team, and it wasn't universal by any means. Like Dave Jordison was an EverQuest advocate, and he was like, when I would go to him and I would say, man, I really want to make this more EverQuest and I want to inject this stuff into it, he was really supportive of that. So again, it wasn't a universal perspective, but it was something that was clear from some of the people who were leads on that project, that they wanted to go in quite a different direction. And it's one of those things that's difficult, because like, you get people with different perspectives on stuff. And like, one of the arguments that I heard was, well, EverQuest and its story just wasn't very sophisticated, and we want to make something more sophisticated. And like, that was one of those trigger words for me, because, well, I know you think you know what that means, but you really don't. What you're saying is that it was the tools of the game were pretty basic, and the story that came through, sometimes by accident, sometimes just by players putting their own version of things together. Like, sure, you can say that we could take a more thoughtful approach to storytelling and those kinds of things, but I don't like you saying that EverQuest was not sophisticated in that way. Like, I think you're misunderstanding what that really means in terms of game making. And
Yeah.
so that was one of the points of contention that I had with certain people on that team.
Yeah. I mean, talk about contention. Yeah, I think so. A number of like my oh shit, I don't even know how to not get triggered on this one. Yeah, so it was weird working on EQ back in the day, and then having people, on other teams explain to you how bad EQ was, and it was just like,
Yeah.
okay, well, it's just whack-a-mole. You kill a thing and you take its shit, and then you use that to kill bigger things, and it's like, yeah, I like that. Like, I enjoy that. Well, but it's not innovative. It's not,
Yeah.
it obviously didn't read Bartle's book. It's just like, I'm like, guys, what are you talking about here? This is the one thing generating money for us. So yeah, that I could rant on that for hours.
Yeah, and I think, I think part of it was that you did have people who had been at SOE for a very long time, and there's a lot of politics that evolve over the years, and people get hurt feelings about stuff, and people, certain people get credit for things that they probably shouldn't get all the credit for, and other people don't get credit for things that they should get credit for, and those kinds of things create tensions and hurt feelings. And so then when some of those people who feel like they were overlooked get a chance to step up to a bigger stage, there is a natural inclination among some people to say, well, screw what came before. They were idiots. They didn't know what was going on. I know the right thing to do, and so that's what I'm going to do. And so screw that game. EverQuest was dumb. We're going to do something different. And again, I'm not saying that everybody was like that, and I'm not even saying that anybody was that forceful about it or anything. But I could see where that mindset could come from when it's an environment that kind of fosters that. And there was many great, I had a great time at SOE. I love a lot of things about it, but like with any place, it had its downfalls and its pitfalls as well. And one of those things was credit, and who actually were the ones doing some stuff wasn't always attributed in the best way that it could have been, I would say.
Yeah, no, well said. I'd heard about some of that going on. I don't know that I saw any of it firsthand, but I'm being sarcastic. Sorry. So yeah, man. All right. So EQ next, and now what happens, Steve?
Well, so like I said, I spent most of my time working on EverQuest Next, working with Storybricks guys, working with we had a team of story people, but we'd always get kind of pulled away. Like I did some stuff for Landmark, like I was doing like figuring out like mining nodes and like how the different minerals would, like I had these, I worked with an engineer and he was like, okay, here's the way we can make shapes for mining nodes. And like, okay. And so I would make a spreadsheet of stuff and populate it into these islands that were for a landmark and all this stuff. And that didn't take up a huge amount of my time. But like there were periods where we had to meet certain milestones for landmark that would just kind of take up the oxygen in the room. And so we'd crunch for a little bit on landmark to get something out the door and see very, it was kind of, it was hard because you didn't see the results from it that you were hoping for. Like engagement was kind of falling off and all that kind of stuff. And then sure enough, the announcement comes that, hey, we've got a buyer for SOE and we're going to transition to this other company. Right. And again, I don't want to speak ill of people. There were some things that were not great about that because it was made clear to us right away that not everybody would transition over. Mm-hmm. And so what does that do to morale? You can imagine what it does to morale when somebody says, hey, keep working on this game that may let you go in 2 weeks. So what do you think is going to happen? No, nobody's working on the damn game. They're sitting around, they're watching, hitting refresh on Kotaku so that they can catch the news of what's actually happening, because it's not going to trickle down from down the hall as fast as it will end up on Kotaku.
We're packing our shit. We're taking home all our little EverQuest figurines. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all of that kind of stuff. and it was super, like, you can't sustain a creative environment that way. So it was very hard. A lot of thoughtful walks over to Starbucks and discussions about what we would do and all this kind of stuff. And so then there was, a process of trimming down the team, and there were a number of those kinds of things. And I think I survived the first initial trimming down, and then we were going to refocus and all this stuff. The relationship with Storybricks kind of went away because that had been under the SOE thing. I had been working with a few authors on it was a project that Ryan Barker had started, who's been on your stream. And
yeah, he's in chat right now, actually. So Caterin.
Mr. Barker, he will probably remember these things better than I could.
He's been making a few references on that,
good.
or a couple of items there, but
okay.
But he said Starbucks actually was Ballast Point, so it sounds like you were drinking beer, not coffee.
Well, God damn it, Ryan! Why are you
he's in chat? Yeah,
I'm weaving this into a nice story, Mr. Barker. If you could just let me have my moment, and then you can tell the dark truths later.
Yeah, we'll bring you back on to tell the actual truth.
Get us both on here, and then
that would be fantastic. We'll actually, no bullshit. We'll follow up on that.
And so like I got to work on that fiction program that Ryan had started. Like that, there were a lot of really awesome things about working on EverQuest Next, and so I think I survived one round, or maybe it was two. It's hard. Again, memory is so impermanent that I hate to say with certainty what went on, but I feel like I survived a layoff or two. I must have, because Ryan got laid off in one, and I stayed on and took over some of the stuff that he had started. And but then there came, one of the layoffs that affected a lot more people, and that one I did not survive. And so then I was once again looking for work. And again, I'd made a lot of great friends at the second iteration of SOE for me. And but I still had, one of the enduring things about 38 Studios was that as that team spread out across the country and went to other places, we all kept looking out for each other because we had formed a really tight bond and worked together. And by that point, Carbine had also kind of like either they were, I think they were WildStar was still going, but it had downsized its team quite a lot. And a bunch of those people had ended up at Blizzard. And I had numerous people reach out to me then who were like, dude, come on, we'll have you talk to people here. And it was very shortly thereafter that I got made an offer at Blizzard. And I will say, for one of the things that I would love to impart to the audience is that in my life, in my experience, every good job I've gotten that I've cared about, that I have loved, has come about because somebody has spoken up for me and said, hey, that guy was good at this other thing. Let's get them in here. Let's do that. And I've tried to do that for other people. And like, no matter what it was, like I worked for a while at this fantasy football website. Like when the .com boom was going, I was like a technical writer / proofreader for them. And they moved offices from this one place to this other. And I went in there on like a Saturday and I was helping move furniture or whatever. And one of the vice presidents of the company saw that and he was like, dude, I love that, because it doesn't matter what your job title is. You just jump in and help people and make sure shit gets done.
Absolutely.
And that kind of work ethic, I think, is what separates a lot of people. The people who have longevity in this industry, I think, have that quality about them, that they're willing to jump on whatever and just roll up their sleeves and help out and do what's asked of them. And, it may not be the ideal thing. Working on Vanguard would never have been a situation that I would have selected to do, but I'm glad I did it, because I got to go in there. I got to work with some great people on a project that it had a super small audience, but those people loved that game. And to like never shun those kinds of opportunities, because you don't know what greatness is going to come out of them, and things that you remember, and that can help change your life. And so that's how I got the 38 Studios job. That's how I first got at SOE. That's how I ended up at Blizzard. Like all of those things. Work hard, be kind to people. Like, yeah, like anybody who knows me will tell you that I can be a big blustery jerk and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I love people, and
Yeah.
and I'm kind to them. And it was the same way with you, Sean. Like, you know, you could be gruff and whatever, but I could tell you love the game, man. And I loved what you loved what you did. And that's the kind of thing that gets you respect and makes opportunities happen for you. And that's the thing that'll see you through those dark times, is that no matter what happens, if you have worked hard and done your job and been good to people, somebody's going to reach out to pick you up when you need it. And just do the same thing for other people when they're in a position where they need it. And that has served me well throughout my career.
Absolutely, dude. Extremely well said. And I appreciate it. Yeah, man. I hope you guys aren't bullshitting about the mic levels on this. I'm very curious to go back and listen to this. I hope it sounds good, because I'm really hoping that when we post this, that people can hear it and it sounds good, because you're saying very wonderful things. I'm very low. As long as he's good, it doesn't matter if I'm very low. Like all I'm worried about is what Steve's been saying. Like I edit my shit out anyway. So cool. You don't want to hear me. All right. So Blizzard, is this where the story has to stop? I don't know how you guys operate.
Yeah, I'm not going to say specifics about the inner workings of Blizzard in the same way that I can talk about some of the past stuff. But so the thing I'll say about Blizzard, and this will sound slightly egotistical about how I look back on things, but like, so one of the things when I started at SOE, again, I assumed walking in there that everybody was going to be super EQ knowledgeable, super passionate about the game, super everything, and know what they were doing and just be experts at it. And pretty early on, I realized, wait, they don't know this. Not everybody does know all this stuff. Not everybody is as passionate. Not everybody knows all this kind of thing. And so I could go into meetings there and feel like I was holding my own, even pretty early on,
Nice.
and talk knowledgeably.
Nice.
And at 38, obviously, I was one of the first people there. So because I was one of the people creating the groundwork of everything, obviously, I was one of the most knowledgeable people there about stuff and could speak to it. But I always wanted to be in the place where I felt like the dumb guy coming in. And when I walked into Blizzard and I went into my first big team meeting of like, I was in a meeting with a bunch of the systems people, and just listening to everybody talk and give their updates on what they were working on and what was in progress and stuff, I took this breath and I went, I'm the dumbest guy in the room, and I freaking love it. Like I've wanted to be in a place where I was the dumbest guy in the room, because then I know that the people around me know their shit and they know what they're doing, and I can just like figure my own stuff out and like find my own way to do this. And like that's the great thing about being there, and just that sense of like, man, people know what they're doing. And the production was, production in the sense of producers and the roles that they have and the jobs that they do, very different than I had seen at other places. Just super smart decisions made, just a great infrastructure to support development. It was just really refreshing to come into that and not have to worry about so many of the things that, like, on previous projects, like, man, I don't know if this person's pulling their weight, so maybe I have to help kind of shore that up or whatever it was. Just that sense of like, man, I can relax a little bit, and but at the same time feel like, shit, I got to get my game. I got to raise my game.
You have to up your game now, right?
Yeah.
Like
so. And that's the kind of creative pressure you want, is you want to be around people who are smarter than you, who know their stuff, so that it pushes you to make yourself better.
I've been so lucky, dude. It seems like every room I'm in, I'm the dumbest dude in the room. And so it's just never been an issue for me, Steve. Maybe I've just been upping my game this whole time.
Well, people have to look at that as a good thing. Like, that's like you should, because that's where challenge comes from. That's where you learn and you grow. Like if you're in an environment where you know everything, then what's pushing you? And there's that ability to stagnate. So so like to be in a position where like, man, I've got to strive, I've got to work every day to get better at my stuff. And I can go into meetings now, and I'm not always the dumbest guy in the room, but I'm still challenged all the time, every day. So that feels good.
So here's an interesting question. Again, I'm going to try to get you to talk as much about the Blizzard experience and WoW
Sure.
as possible,
Mm-hmm.
with an understanding naturally. I understand it's your current employer, they're high profile. I'm happy to just be able to have you on here. I've talked to a couple of folks that have just gone up there, and I'm still trying to get Steve Burke to show up at some point, since he was such a big part of my early career, and he's such a
Uh,
fun guy.
Well, I work very closely with Steve Burke. So the good thing is, I can now say to him, "Oh, I went on there. Yeah, Sean, he was asking me all the great questions. You probably wouldn't have anything more to say," and that'll fire him up, and he'll be like, "Yeah, I'm going to get on that show. I'm going to talk. I will do better than Danuser."
Yeah, just tell him I
So
claimed
it'll be
all
good.
his stuff. Like, tell him I invented the ring war. Just tell him I claim it all. See if we can get him to actually show up.
All
Um,
right, all right.
but yeah, so I mean, but I do. It's a rad opportunity. First of all, it's great. Like, it's a great story. The struggles that you had, like with regards to the various projects and some of the stuff that just didn't work out the way you'd wanted or
Mhm.
whatever, and now you're on, the MMO, and you've got a great role in that. Unless I misunderstood your damn title, it's a significant
Mhm.
one. And so, I mean, that is sort of the picture of success. That is that, and that's not one of those things that should be taken lightly in this industry or any industry. So you're there. I want you to talk about some shit. I know you can't talk about everything, but I do want to get into a little bit.
Mhm.
One of the questions that came up is from Ethan. Do you miss Mob Hunter and the freedom it gave you to talk to players? Is there like, do you feel like you're sort of more inside now, and like, is it different? Describe the process. Let me shut up.
Yeah. Well, it was like, even when I went from Mob Hunter to SOE, it was clearly a transition. And when you are in the community, purely as whether you're like, at the time it was bloggers and fan site people. Now it's streamers and so forth. But like, you do have the freedom to talk about whatever ideas you want, and the freedom to say like, oh, this is good, this is bad, this was smart, this was dumb, like all of those kinds of things. And on Mob Hunter, I did, I was never trying to kiss people's asses, but I did at least try to be fair to developers and try to at least, there were a lot of fan, or like, some of the WoW guys, came from the EQ community and had been guild leaders and all that kind of
Mm,
thing, and spoke like, they had rants about how stupid SOE was and all that kind of thing. And
no way.
I just didn't want Mob Hunter to be a rant site. Like, I wanted it to be a thoughtful kind of place. And so, yeah, I would report on stories of whatever the raid leaders were talking about, because they were the influencers of that time. Um, but I always try to at least like try to think from the game developer's perspective of why they might have made some of the decisions they did. And once I got on the inside and started learning more about the process, and even when Hartzman started emailing me, like I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned at the beginning, that at least started giving me that additional perspective of like, man, these are just people trying to do a job and trying to do right by this player base. Like, nobody intentionally sets out to piss any players off or anything like that. Like, but stuff happens. These are super complicated games, and it's easy when you're in the community to look at one thing and say, well, this one thing has to change clearly, but you don't know how connected that one thing is to so many other decisions that are around it. And that's
Right.
the perspective that you get on the inside. And like, man, maybe on some fan level, I can agree with the things that you're saying, but if only you understood more of the broader context to it. And it's not a matter of being smarter than someone in the community. It's just a matter of having different information than they do. So like I can still fully, when I hear somebody ranting about WoW or EverQuest or any other game, like I get it. I get why they would have that point of view. But and there's no way to bring all those people on the inside and show them, well, here's how all of this stuff works. Like it takes years to understand it. So you can't just, like, we try to give little peeks where we can that will help give context to certain decisions and things like that, but it's just really hard. And there's always going to be that dividing line between the community, no matter how informed and well-intentioned some people are there, and the developers, just because we have different, not only different information, but frankly different responsibilities. Like, you know, when you're on a game team, you are in the trenches with those people, and we've all got families and we've all got jobs, and we need to pay mortgages and we need to feed, you know, our families around us. And like that's a responsibility you have to one another. So like one person can't come in and screw that up for an entire group of people. Like, you know, these are the people I'm in the trenches with, that I'm working with on a daily basis. So like I'm not going to do anything to sabotage those people. And in the community, again, as great as the fans are and as great as that, like you just don't have those same responsibilities. You don't have those same accountability for things. So like you can't just make, like, even the position that I'm in, I can't just walk into a room and arbitrarily say, no, we're doing this and this and this instead because I think this would be so much better and just you wait and see. Like, no, like there's this whole group of people that all work together and collaborate on these things. And I'm not going to disrespect them and their careers for the sake of my ego or what I'm doing. Like we're all in this together, and we've got to make this thing that feeds our families and provides entertainment for millions of people. Like that's a responsibility I don't take lightly at all. Like as you said, reaching the point that I am on WoW, like I do have this global audience that's the largest audience I've ever had for anything I've worked on. And that's a tremendous, like I take that responsibility very seriously. And you know, as much as people can nitpick about certain decisions or certain whatevers, like just know that there is so much more to it than the details that someone might focus on. There's just so much going on and so many people involved, and it's well intentioned, and we're just trying to make something that makes people feel good and happy. And it can't always work that way. There's going to be things people get upset about, but that's the nature of this business. And the great thing about working on MMOs, the thing that sets them apart from other games, is if something doesn't work, the game keeps going and you get a chance to try again and make something that works a little bit better next time. And you get to learn from mistakes. And you don't get to do that on just that kind of like ship it and move on to the next thing. It's always a state of iteration. And I love that.
Yeah. And it's one of those weird things I didn't fully understand. I remember we were at a movie once, and this is after I'd been working on EQ for a few years. And honestly, it's even then I was definitely very immature. I was new in my career, but I was starting to sort of understand some of the creative pressures, because it was either we're looking at something and being highly derivative of a thing that we think has succeeded in the past, and so we're going to just do it that way, right? You know, like, hey, let's just make another battle royale with blah, 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 you know, like sort of follow the formula. Or, you know, in the case of EverQuest, especially when we were there, we really didn't have anything to look at that point, especially around planes or whatever, right? And so we're kind of making this shit up as we go. We don't even have we don't have good examples to steal from for the specific things. We're always stealing, right? But, and we're sitting there thinking, wow, if we screw this up, not only do we screw it up for the game that we love, we screw it up for all the fans who are definitely going to shit on our head. And we may actually screw up bad enough that the people that are currently employed here have to go find other jobs at some point. And we may screw it up in a way where we didn't realize we screwed it up until X amount of time later. And we set a bomb, basically, that screws everything up. And then we're those dudes, right? And like when you're in your 20s and you just came from the community, you don't have formal training in this shit. You just joined the company because you thought it was a badass game. And that realization starts to click. It's like, oh shit. Well, I mean, the cool thing is I have enough money to buy some beer and, on the weekend and maybe not sweat it so much until Monday. And I've got to go back to figuring this out. But anyways, this is leading up to, we were leaving a movie theater and it was some M. Night Shyamalan bullshit. Um, and the people in front of us were just ripping it apart. And I looked at the dude and said, hey, what was the last thing you made, dude? Like,
Yeah.
have you made anything? Does anybody watch any of your shit? Does anybody play your game? All right, well then let me enjoy my movie. Shut up, and like just went to my car because it was like it was that bit of pressure. So, yeah, in your role, man, like I it's I don't envy you, but I do, but I don't. All right, so like I know you. You're a great guy. Anybody that's watched for the last 3 hours knows you're a great guy, right? So invariably, there are going to be people that like I don't like this, I do like that, or whatever. But I mean, that's okay.
Yeah, it is like that's one of those things. So very early on, again, I worked in record stores for a long time. And when I started working in record stores, fresh out of high school, snotty, like know it all, everything. I had the best taste in music out of anybody. Like anybody who buys this, I was big into alternative music at the time. There was still like heavy metal was big, and I was like, oh, those idiots, heavy metal, bunch of burnouts, blah blah blah, whatever. Like I knew the best of everything, and I was working. I shifted to between a few different record stores. I was working at a place in the Twin Cities at the time at a bigger record store, and they had tons of used albums and like just bins and bins full of just utter crap and whatever. And I had to do inventory or something, and so I'm thumbing through these records and I'm looking at all these album covers and like, oh, what, this is shit, this is shit, this is shit, like all of that kind of thing. And somewhere along the way, as I'm going through that, like I stopped on this one, and it was like this terrible 70s album, no idea what it was, but I'm looking at it, and I started from that place of like, man, this is dumb. How could anybody like this? But I was just looking at it, and it just suddenly dawned on me that somewhere in the world, there was somebody that for them, this was the best record ever made. And they loved this record, and they would play it every day and listen to it in the same way that I had listened to the Police's Synchronicity, or like any of those records that had like formed my life early on. There was somebody that this record was it for them. And all of a sudden it changed my entire perspective on music. And I realized, God damn it, I've been an idiot. I don't know everything. I know nothing about any of this stuff. I've just been operating off my, drinking my own fumes, my own gasoline,
Right.
just fueling myself with this idea of what I think is right, and like looking down on other people for their taste. That's so stupid. That's so stupid. And I took that philosophy forward into games, and like that's one of the things about Vanguard. Like for the people who were playing Vanguard, like you could objectively say, from someone from the outside could come in and say, why the hell would you play this game? It's buggy, it's incomplete content, it's the models don't look great anymore, the animations don't look great, all of these things you could make the case for. But there's people in the world that for them, that was the perfect game, and they loved it. And that's true of EverQuest, that's true of any game that you can think of, and it's true of any movie that you can think of, that no matter what, like if you're sitting there and you're just bad mouthing some movie, like you said, like that guy in the theater, man, there's not only people in the audience who love that movie and think it's awesome, there's people who poured their hearts and souls into making that movie happen. And just the fact that any movie gets made is a miraculous undertaking. It takes so much effort, and games are the same way. Just to make a game, no matter if it's good or not, like just making a game is a remarkable undertaking. So many things have to come together from the business side, from the creative side, just to get it out the door. So
Yeah.
every game is miraculous in its own way. And for somebody to just be able to redactively kind of come in and say, oh, that's crap. Oh, that's dumb. Oh, that's, blah, blah, blah. Like, you don't understand what went on to make that happen. You don't appreciate it. And so, like the great author Harlan Ellison, who was a cantankerous a-hole, like just like notorious stories about him. But he has a great quote that I always remember, some publisher or something came at him with a bunch of like, well, we like this, but we want you to change X, Y, Z. And he said, no, screw you. Where were you when the page was blank, motherfucker?
Oof.
And like, and that thing is the biggest, like, yeah, where were you when the page was blank? Like, it's fine for you to rip this movie apart or book apart or whatever, but you weren't the one there in the trenches. You weren't the one.
Shit. I love
like,
that.
It's and again, there's lots of cases. I'm not saying that that's the way it is overall, but like, just keep that in mind when there are those people online who are just so instantly negative about something, and all they really want is for things to fail, because that's you can always bet on failure, because that's the biggest case. Like, that's going to happen most of the time. Most movies aren't going to do what they thought they were going to do. Most books aren't going to sell as well as the publisher hoped. Most games aren't going to sell as well as the publisher hoped. All of that is true. So if all you want to do is come in and say, oh, they're idiots, that's going to fail, you'll be right most of the time, but not because you had some insight into their creative process, or not because you understood the business that they were doing, or any of that stuff. It's just, that's how the odds work out. Yeah. So instead, try to look for those things that are hopeful. Again, just those small number of people who were playing Vanguard, God bless them. God bless all of those people. And for whatever MMOs are out there in development, whatever the size of their audience, God bless those people, because they've got something that they're passionate about. And passion means so much in this world where we're dealing with epidemics and hatreds and contention all the time. Man, if somebody loves something, let them love that thing. What's it to you? No matter what it is, just let them love it, man. And don't try to tell them they're wrong for loving something. Just let them.
I love it, dude. Yeah. It's like, and if you don't like it, free market. Go do some other shit, man. Like, what?
There's so many other movies to watch, so many other books to read.
Or better yet, grab yourself a blank page. Like, go for it. Right? Like, yeah, man. Awesome. I love it. Perfect. Yeah, but you know the truth, though. We do read those things. Every once in a while, we check the forums. Every once in a while, we look at the comments, and it hurts a little bit, you know. But yeah, get over it.
Yeah, it's sure. I read the Reddits too, and all that stuff, and I know the things people say, and ever since the original EverQuest days, one of the things that people always said is like, oh, they ignore us, they ignore what we're saying, and all those kinds of things. Like, no, that's never the case. The developers always know what's being said. It's just that not everything can get acted on, and not everything can get acted on right away. These are big projects. A lot of things take time, and so it's just try to have perspective and just think about things. And again, like, whenever I'm in, every job, every professional endeavor, there's always going to be you're going to come into conflict with people that you're working with. Like, that's inevitable. I always try to assume that if there's a disagreement, both sides have the best intentions. Like, we're both trying to do something great. So let's figure out what our common ground is, and we'll work out the details of it and make sure that we come up with something that we can work with. And just think about, like, creative endeavors that way. Like, if it's a movie that you didn't like, the last Star Wars movie, whatever it is, like, those blah, 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 just at least think of it that, man, there were people who poured their hearts into that. And yeah, maybe you didn't like the way it came out, and maybe they're not even happy with the way that it came out. Like, there's a lot of things that are out of people's control, but at least try to assume good intention. Like, assume at least most people were trying to do the right thing, and we're trying to entertain the audience and try to make them happy. And if you assume that good intent, maybe it'll change the way that you interact with some of those people. Or, like, maybe you were going to post the angry thing online, and maybe instead you'll give the benefit of the doubt. Just try to think of it that way.
Yeah. Well, and I've also the thing I've been trying to do more recently is the reverse as well, which is like, here's this person that's passionate about it. And like, we've always had this process, like, man, I understand this guy's saying this shit because he's passionate about it, or she didn't like this because of blah, blah. But as I get older, I reflect on what I was like when I was like 20 something. And like, I was like, okay, if I was in that position, if I was some people were asking about different raid leaders and stuff like that during the EQ days and like where they've gone. And I'm like, honestly, I look back on some of the stuff that was posted in the forums back in the day, and I've seen where, I've seen where Alex and, like Jeff and people have progressed, and I'm stoked. I'm like, good man. And they went for it. They had an opportunity. They they apparently did something right. They were smart people back then. Some of
Mm-hmm.
the stuff was poorly expressed, but some of that was also, that's part of the game. It's like wrestling, right? Like that is it's professional wrestling, guys. It's not, I mean, I look up some of that shit just for giggles these days. Like some of the young kids I work on MMOs with, I'm like, "Oh, you want to hear something? Check this picture out that was drawn of me. Apparently, I can break dance while doing that." Like um and that's the kind of shit where I watch these people now progress, and my thing is I look at it, and just like we were just saying for you, I know the pressure they're under now. Like I know the stuff that they've had to do in their careers and stuff like that, and I'm like, cool, man. And I'm pretty sure they've matured, and it's badass. So, high fives.
Yeah, people, again, like if you had met snotty record store me back in the day, you probably think I was a jerk for good reasons and all that kind of stuff. And people do grow and change, and they get different perspectives in their lives. And I like to think that I've gained perspective on things in mine. And it's the same way in the community. There's people who can be like even on my time from EQ2, there was a guy who started off being a super ranty kind of guy, and I spent some time talking to him, individually, and it kind of opened his eyes to some stuff, and he became, he was still always challenging the team and things like that on the decisions they made, but he did it from a different point of view. He at least saw that we were humans, and that's what I tried to do as a community manager, was humanize our team. And I think I even tried to do that on Mob Hunter, where as I started to learn that the team was made of humans, I tried to again provide some perspective and some humanity there. And just remember, like it's so easy. Like back in the day, people would say variant this or SOE this, and this is what the company thinks. And, like it's never really like that. Like almost all of these things just happen because people working on the project tried to do the right thing, and maybe something went wrong and something didn't work the way that people thought it would work. But again, it was like well intentioned, and there isn't some corporate hive mind most of the time. There's obviously decisions that get made at corporate levels and things like that, but like for the most part, the stuff that happens on games is because people were trying to do something on the game team. And yeah, sometimes it worked out great and sometimes it didn't, and had to deal with, what resulted from that.
Yeah, and in the some of the worst case scenarios for the developers is, yeah, sometimes there are those corporate things at different companies or whatever that, that they're not good decisions, or they don't have the best intentions, but then you've still got to think about the developers and
Yeah.
like, all right, so I'm trapped in between those things, right? And so I've definitely seen that in my experience, in my past as well. So I've been that guy. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, man. All right, we just hit the 3 hour 15 mark. Um, I don't. Yeah, it's only 10 p.m. here. I know it's about lunchtime, your your time.
You're going to start picking.
So
So tell
yeah,
me
it
about.
seems like we're kind of hitting that point in the two old men philosophizing part of the stream. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't want to, I don't want to cut off any opportunity. Did we forget anything, or is there were there questions that we missed or anything? You know, guys, I'll give you a minute. I know there's a little bit of delay. We'll keep an eye out. If we didn't miss anything critical, Steve, if you don't have anything like that, you're thinking, man, why didn't we cover this or whatever?
No, I think you did a great job teeing up questions and allowing me to just rant on probably way more than I should.
Oh no way! You did a perfect amount of ranting.
But yeah, I mean, again, uh, I just feel super fortunate to have the career I had. Highs and lows and all. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. I've got to meet great people like yourself, and it's just great to be able to reconnect. Like every time I see, go to a GDC and see Hartzman there, it'd be a warm hug between us. And again, there's so many shared experiences that, again, it almost transcends words. Like there's just, you don't have to speak all of these things because you just get it. And so that's why I liked coming on here, because you understand this stuff. And I'm very happy to see the success that you have. I think you're on an awesome game right now. My daughter is certainly a fan, as you well know.
Yeah, as I know. Yep.
Yeah, and I think it's just great that so many people who started from this little place in San Diego that just kind of acted as a gravity well and brought a bunch of people in. Now those people have spread out across the country, across the world, and we still have these bonds that tie us together. And like nothing is going to break those things of like, man, I know what we went through. I know what we experienced, and that's something that we'll always share.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on here. Man, excellent guest. Wonderful storyteller. It seems like you've got the right, you picked the right career path. Yeah. So I might be, over the next year, I might be trying to start up a little something. We've called it EverQuest. We're kicking it around. We're trying to think. We were like, I wonder if there's any sort of a game we could emulate. So it'll be a little project on the side. We'll see what we can do. When it blows up, we'll naturally be looking for someone to write the little stories about elves and squirrels and shit, whatever it is you do for a living. So I'll keep you in mind.
After talking me up, you just minimize everything I do, because I've made a very fine career of writing little stories about elves and scrolls and shit. So screw you, Sean Lord. Screw you.
Mic drop, table flip. You're out. All right, Steve.
It's
I
been a lot of
appreciate you being on here, man. I'll follow up with you after this. I'll do the little closeout or whatever. I don't want to make it too awkward, but thank you so much for being on. It's badass.
Thanks everybody for watching.
I did write a note that says Ryan Barker and Steve. Maybe a little three-way action here.
Wow, that could be too hot for the interwebs. I don't know.
We'll follow up after this and see.
All right, man.
All right, dude.
Take care.
See you.